Hello and welcome back to Baldur's Gate 2. We have finally got a stronghold, and as I said at a very early episode, once we got a stronghold, we were going to read all of our books, and then we were going to leave our books at the stronghold, which will actually allow us to do some inventory management, because, as you may be aware, we have all of these scroll bags just filled with books. There is nothing in here except books. And then we have another one, which is also filled with books. And then we have a third one, which is filled with a lot of scrolls, but also has a lot of books. So, basically, I want to fix this issue, and once we do that, then that will fix a lot of our inventory problems, because we'll be able to put all the scrolls in here, we'll be able to split up our scrolls into different scroll types, we'll be able to have one for each group of people, we'll be able to have like a scroll thing for notes. I think we may even have some books inside this as well. Yeah, we do have some books inside this as well that we can get rid of. There's a whole bunch that we can get rid of. And once we are happy with that, then we can probably go and place all of the equipment that's currently in this bag in like one of these containers as well, which will then mean that we're no longer carrying around all of that. We have somewhere to leave equipment, and it just fixes all of our inventory issues completely. So, we're going to get started. Now, I'm just going to go through each person. Oh, we also have another scroll case as well, which may also have, it also has books in it, just for extra books. So, here's the way we're going to tackle this. What we're going to do is we're just going to start on a person, and we're going to read books. Once we have read all the books that person has, we're going to put them in a container. The only time we're going to jump between people is if we're checking if we have a sequel to one of the books that we have read. For instance, if I check this one, because I saw some in here, we have like the History of Shadowdale 13, right? We're not going to read the History of Shadowdale 13. We would start with the History of Shadowdale 1 and work our way up. So this kind of book we'll leave till later, or we'll go and find like the next one of. Yeah, and like these Histories of the North, we'll probably read a 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll go and check if there's a 5, or the History of the Drow, so on and so forth. So that's basically the plan, and we're obviously not going to read repeats. So let's find a book, and let's get started. I'm going to start up here on this one. Actually, let's start with you. So yours, this is just the note we got from Imsvale telling us that we now have this thing. That's cool. Right. Let's now go into your scroll case and start with your one. We'll just go from the top down. So what have we got here? The History of Alm. Okay, also, now that I think about it, I do want to move Jahira over here, because then when we're done, we can chuck them into this thing right there. Do you actually have any space? No. In which case, what we're going to do is also move some of this, just so that we have a little space to work with after this in order to clean up the bags. She's probably going to complain that she's not got any space soon. Oh, perfect. Another one? Perfect. That'll work for us right now. Cool. So, let's go History of Am, History of Tethair, and the History of the Sisters of Light and Darkness. And we'll start with those. Do these stack in this one, or do they only stack when they're in... yeah, they don't stack. They only stack when they're in here. Okay, cool. So, History of Alm. History of Alm. Alm has the good fortune to have abundant natural resources. Some would say Alm is the richest land on the continent. This has worked in Alm's favour for generations, because even if they were conquered, the new masters would be gentle, looking to gain wealth from the land rather than to put it to the torch. Alm has been a centre of trade and commerce for as long as anyone can remember. Oral traditions handed down from father to son tend to support the theory that Alm has been a trade centre for at least 800 years. Unfortunately, written records are difficult to find and often incomplete. It would seem the typical Amian citizen was too busy trying to fill their coffers to write down events of the day. Alm has always been more interested in the present and the future than the past, and this makes an accurate history difficult. The best records, the business papers of the oldest trading companies, are jealously guarded. The fear of revealing trade secrets is stronger than the call of history, so the average citizen knows very little about Alm's past. It appears that the Am of 100 years ago was very much like the Kalasham of today. Each major city was basically an independent entity, banding together for defense when necessary and fighting for control of territory and profitable trade routes the rest of the time. A particularly brutal trade war began 24 years ago, with each city exacting prohibitive tariffs on goods imported from the others. I'm going to assume that whenever the books reference a date, like 24 years ago, they're kind of meaning that every book was written like in the year that you found it, if that makes sense. So 24 years ago from now. Just a point. The trade war escalated, and city troops began to raid caravans sponsored by other cities. In a matter of months, commerce was brought to a halt, a number of cities were under siege, and war threatened to engulf the entire region. Into the breach stepped a young merchant named Thays Semmelchant. Thays was smart, charismatic, and very well connected. The Semmelchant trading house was one of the oldest and richest in Athkatla. He secretly contacted representatives of the 5 other richest merchant houses in Am and started a plan. The first part of that plan involved the careful sprinkling of rumours about outside threats. One involved a pirate invasion from the Nillanthar. Another was about a massing of orcs just on the other side of the Cloud Peaks. Thays even started a rumour about an elf army in the forest of Tethir, ready to pounce on a divided Am. None of the rumours were true, but they began to turn people's thoughts towards unity, not war. Thays knew that if he and the other members of his council were to take control of Am, they would need broad-based popular support. Tensions between cities and merchant houses were still high, so to get that support, Semmelchant and the others agreed to drop their family names and never use them again. Interesting. Okay. When news of a Council of 6 spread throughout the land, many people accepted their rule. A group that would unite Am under one rule governing for the benefit of all instead of one city or trading company over another was indeed a welcome change. The council raised an army, at great expense, to quell the few pockets of resistance that remained, and has been in total control of Am for the past 22 years. So let's just go back to this one. So the brutal trade war was 24 years ago, and within 2 years, they were in total control of Am. Okay, it's the 6 major merchant houses. Interesting, and that would basically imply that Thays is still around and in charge. Okay, so these are some names to look out for. Thays and Semmelchant and the Council of 6. Okay, good first one. Gives us some background on Am itself, which I think we were kind of missing before. So, the history of Tethir. So, Tethir was mentioned in this one, wasn't it? Or did I just read about the thing? No, Tethir was not mentioned in this one. Tethir was mentioned, the forest of Tethir, but not Tethir with a Y. Are these different? I don't know. Probably not. Maybe different? I don't know. Anyway. History of Tethir. For the past 1,500 years, Tethir had a single strong royal family ruling with absolute power. When a king died or became incapacitated, his oldest son took the throne. As the family trees of those close to power became more intertwined and complicated, there were inevitable wars of succession and bickering over which second cousin was the true heir to the throne. Civil wars were brief, however, and once the fighting was over, the system returned to normal, until the next major dispute in a few hundred years or so. So I'm going to say that this Tethir is the same as the other Tethir, right? I think it's just a spelling difference, because they said that the Tethir was an elf army, and if it happens every 100 years or so, then that makes sense, right? Because elves live a long time. Cool. Let's see here. The established recurring cycle was broken 10 years ago. The current ruling family had been in power for over 350 years, so long that they had dropped their own family name centuries ago. No one even remembers it now, and simply called themselves Tethir. King Aelmander IV was comfortably ruling from Castle Tethir, and the country seemed happy enough, but there was a broad current of dissatisfaction among the people of Tithir. Non-humans were forbidden by law to own land, and since most rights and privileges accorded citizens were based on land ownership, they became second-class citizens as well. Oh, interesting. Oh, okay, never mind. I'm about to figure out some stuff. Things were especially bad for elves who were driven deep into the forest of Tithir by royal armies. So the forest is spelt with an I, while the place is spelt with a Y. That's not confusing naming at all. Also, I guess major disputes are several hundred years or so, but that's only when there's not a proper heir, I'm guessing. Okay, so not elves ruling, humans ruling. Got it. Ilmander IV took land away from rightful owners and gave it to nobles who promised larger contributions to the royal treasury. These social and economic inequalities, coupled with several harsh winters and bad harvests in a row, made the time ripe for a change. It takes more than just a couple lousy winters to depose a king, however. It takes treachery as well. In the case of the fall of House Tithir, it took an ambitious general and an impatient royal heir. Prince Ilmander grew tired of waiting for the robust Ilmander IV to make room for him, so he struck a deal with General Nashram Sharboneth, commander of the king's largest army. While Sharboneth marched his army towards Tithir, bringing along a sizable group of angry peasants recruited with the promise of land reform, the would-be Ilmander V downplayed alarming reports from the king's spies and advisors, silencing the most persistent permanently through murder or exile. By the time Sharboneth's army arrived and laid siege to Castle Tithir, it was too late for loyalists to help. As Sharboneth launched a direct assault on the castle using the expendable peasants as shock troops, a handful of elite soldiers let in a secret entrance by the prince would eliminate key guards and open the gates. At the same time, the prince, one of the few people allowed to see the king directly, would murder his father. A fire set by the elite troops would destroy evidence of treachery. The general and the prince would emerge from the conflagration and announce a new joint government. The plan was executed perfectly, but only up to a point. Sharboneth double-crossed the prince. His men were much too efficient in setting a castle ablaze, and Prince Ilmander, along with most of his fellow conspirators, died horribly in the fire. At about the same time, a spy planted on the general's inner staff by the equally duplicitous Ilmander murdered the general and dissolved his body with a powerful acid before anyone could come to his aid. Oh, wow. Okay. So Sharboneth betrayed Ilmander and burned him alive. Ilmander betrayed Sharboneth and dissolved him in acid, so that means nobody is in charge. To make matters worse, everyone had underestimated the resentment the people felt for the royal family. Once Castle Tithir began to fall, there was no holding back the mob. In one night, the proudest, strongest castle in all the country was reduced to a smoking ruin. Everything of value, fine tapestries, plates and silverware, furniture, jewellery, weapons, clothing, armour, painting, statues, etc., was either stolen, burned, or just ripped apart and stomped into the dust. As news of the fall of the royal family spread, so did the chaos. In what is now known as the 10 Black Days of Alient, anyone known or even suspected a blood connection to the royal family was put to the sword. This led to some darkly humorous moments as social climbers who had bragged just a week before being a sixth cousin twice removed of a royal aunt tried in vain to convince an angry mob that they were only kidding. The nobles who were the biggest supporters of the royal family also came under attack, and some baronial keeps fell. Local leaders who had adequately distanced themselves from the Tithir family or were popular enough or feared/strong enough survived. These surviving nobles became the initial players in the fight to decide the fate of Tithir. One thing was certain: any leader or type of government that too closely resembled rule under the Tithirs would not be accepted. Royalist became a dirty word in Tithir society. The power struggle continues to this day, and there is no sign of it ending anytime soon. Okay, so Tithir is just complete chaos right now because every major player betrayed each other and the peasants rose up. Okay, interesting. Also, we've got the elves were exiled into the forest, and then that was used by Am as like a, well, maybe they're coming for us next. Interesting. Right. Now, I believe we're on to the history of the Sisters of Light and Darkness. So I believe this is going to be talking about Shar and Selûne. Let's see. Yes. History of the Sisters of Light and Darkness. This was the birth of the world and the heavens. After Lord Eo created realm space, there was a period of timeless nothingness, a misty realm of shadows before light and dark were separate entities. Within this dim chaos stalked 13 Lords of Shadow, the Shadvari. Whether they came from elsewhere or children of the shadow itself, none can say. Eventually, this primordial essence coalesced into twin beautiful goddesses who were yin and yang to each other. They were so close they thought of themselves as one being. The two-faced goddess created the heavenly bodies of the crystal sphere and together infused them with life to form the Earth Mother Chontia, though Chontia has since contracted her essence to encompass only Aber Turel. In the beginning she embodied all matter and realm space. This new universe was lit by the face of the silver-haired goddess, who called herself Selûne, and darkened by the welcoming tresses of the raven-haired goddess Shar, but no heat or fire existed within it. Chontia begged for warmth so that she could nurture life and living creatures upon the planets that were her body and limbs, and the two sisters, who were one, became divided, as for the first time they were of two minds. Silvery Selûne contested with her dark sister over whether or not to bring further life to the worlds. During this great conflagration, they like that word, the gods of war, disease, murder, and death, among others, were created from residues of the deific battle. At one point, during the battle, Selûne seized the advantage and reached across time and space to a land of eternal fire. Fighting the pain of the blaze which burned her sorely, she broke off a fragment of that ever-living flame and ignited one of the heavenly bodies so that it burned in the sky and warmed Chontia. Also, interestingly, the gods of war, disease, murder, and death were formed here. So the god of murder being Baal. So this is where Baal was created. Incensed, Shar redoubled her attack on her injured twin and began to snuff out all light and heat throughout the crystal sphere. Again, Selûne gave of herself and tore the divine essence of magic from her body, flinging it desperately at her sister, in defense of life in the sphere. This essence entered Shar, ripped an equal portion of energy from her, and reformed behind her as the goddess of magic known now as Mistra, but then as Mistril. Though Mistral was composed of both light and dark magic, she favoured her first mother, Selûne, initially, allowing the silvery goddess to win an uneasy truce with her more powerful dark twin. Consumed by bitterness at her defeat, Shar vowed eternal revenge. The twin goddesses contested for eons as life struggled into existence on Turel and the other planets under Chontia's watchful gaze. Shar remained powerful but bitterly alone, while Selûne waxed and waned in power, often drawing strength from her allied daughters and sons and like-minded immigrant deities. Over time, Shar grew strong again, aided by the Shadvari, who preferred night to blinding light and who stalked the realm seeking to meld light and dark into shadowy chaos once again. Shar's plot to reform the world after her own desires was undone when Azuth, the High One, formerly the greatest of all mortal spellcasters and now consort to Mistra, incarnate successor to Mistril, found a way to imprison the Shadvari in a pocket-sized crystal sphere located beyond the edges of the world by creating the illusion of a realm of shadows. The Lords of Shadow were drawn to investigate, and before they discovered the trick, Azuth imprisoned the Shadvari with the Shadow Star, a key of shadows forged by Gond. The High Lord then hurled the key into the endless reaches of the cosmos, allowing life to flourish on in Chontia's loving hands. Interesting. Okay, so a lot of deep lore into the creation of everything, basically there. Okay, so we've got a wide variety of information from our first set of books. Let's see what we got coming up next. So next we have the history of Waterdeep. Now I have 3, 4, 5, 6 here, and I also have history of the North. History of the Red Ravens we'll take out. So do we have the history of Waterdeep 2 and 1? That's what we want to find out here. Does anyone have the history of Waterdeep 2 and 1? They're probably in this container, if I had to guess. I have the history of Waterdeep Deep 2. Let's send that one out. And 1. Perfect. Okay, so we'll send those over to Jaheira. And then we're going to open the rest of these. So that's going to be out here, that's going to be out here, and out here. Cool. Right. Let's start with the history of the Red Ravens. I have no idea what this is. One of the few long-standing mercenary companies that operate in Cormyr, the Red Ravens have a strength on paper of 110 swords, but can easily triple that number with new hires if they get a sufficiently large contract. They've been kept on retainer by the government of Cormyr, with the stated purpose of cleaning out the Stonelands to the north. They have been moderately successful in this goal, but the Stonelands are still far from being a safe territory. The Red Ravens are commanded by Rhianna the Rose, a veteran of the Horde Crusade. They are noted for their honesty and trustworthiness, as they do not wish to jeopardize their royal charter. Most of their troops are armed with studded leather and carry long swords. They charge 200 gold pieces a week for the services of their 110 being unit. Their symbol is a red raven amulet. That was rather concise. Okay. It was more like, here's who the Red Ravens are and here's why you might want to hire them. And then all of these are the history of Waterdeep. 1 to 7. Okay, I think I'm ready. History of Waterdeep. Waterdeep was used as a trading site for trade activities between northern tribesmen and southern merchants more than 2 millennia ago. By 1,000 years ago, permanent farms had sprung up in the area. The first mention of Waterdeep, not as a city but as a collection of warlords, occurs only 400 years ago. The city was truly established as a going concern by 1032 DR. So I believe we're in the 1300 DRs right now. So, like 300 years ago is when that happened. The city was truly established as a growing concern by 1032 DR, the year Agarion became the first lord of Waterdeep, and the date from which North Reckoning is counted. The city grew spectacularly, such that by 1248 DR, both the City of the Dead and the guilds had been developed. The guildmasters seized control soon afterwards, ushering in a period of unrest and bitter conflict known as the Guild Wars. The Guild Wars ended only when the two surviving guild masters brought in their own period of misrule. It was only in 1273 DR that the present system of government, or lack thereof, was instituted. This was the year that the Magisters were established and the secret Lords of Waterdeep were firmly re-established. Since that time, the city has continued to grow and prosper. Humankind and other races come from all over the realms to earn hard coin in the City of Splendors. Over the years, these successful merchants have set up guilds and themselves become nobility, supporting the secretive Lords of Waterdeep who police the city fairly, yet with a light hand by means of the superb City Guard, soldiers, City Watch, police, and over 20 black-robed magistrates. As a result, Waterdeep is a place tolerant of different races, religions, and lifestyles. This in turn has encouraged commerce, and Waterdeep has grown into a huge, eclectic city, even. Okay, so that was a pretty concise history of everything up to about 100 years ago to now. So why are there 6 other histories of Waterdeep? Let's see if we can find 2. There's 2. Age 0, Tube Mots and Pioneers. Few now know the true history of this great city, which had its beginnings over 1,000 years ago when the North was truly what Southerners still sneeringly call it, the Savage North. In those days, most of the North was covered with vast tall forests of ancient green and inhabited by dwarves and goblin kind, in the most northern mountains and footholds, and elves in widely scattered forest enclaves everywhere else. A few primitive human tribes lived along the Sword Coast, fishing, hunting, and gathering in spring and fall to trade their furs with vessels sailing in from the south for merchants, jewelry, metal tools, and occasionally available weapon or two. In the spring, these vessels came primarily to cut and take huge trees for shipbuilding, trees being no longer available in such large sizes further south. In the fall, vessels came in to cut timber for their own repairs, or to take on a cargo of wood if their misfortunes of trading had left their holds low or empty. Most of these trade moutes were at a certain place where there was a great natural deep water harbour, protected from the sea by a rocky spur of land and an arm of isolated coastal crag or rocky island beyond it. So it seems like the first one was kind of like a history of the politics, and now we're getting into what's happening at each age here. Okay, 3. Age 1. The rise of the warlords. Over the years, the forest was cut back farther and farther from the shore, and tribes began to stay most of the year there, farming the cleared land. The wiser among them claimed and controlled some of the timber in order to trade for more weaponry and tools. Such claims angered many who found the squatters rich from frequent trade and brought attacks from land and sea, and the more warlike tribes slaughtering the more sedentary settlers. Noted among these tribes was that led by Nemor, a chieftain who ordered his people to seize the farms, crude wooden docks, trading sheds, and storage barns built up around the bay. They settled there themselves and erected a log palisade within an earthen embankment to protect the holdings. After several abortive pirate and tribal raids, Nemor's people thrived in their new home, a fledgling town referred to as the Town of Water Deep. Farther north, orc tribes had outgrown their mountain strongholds. Attempts to expand underground met with fierce dwarven resistance, though many small gnomish colonies were overwhelmed and wiped out, and the orcs spread out on the surface of the land, coming south and down out of the mountains, hurling their seemingly endless numbers against all who stood in their path. Here and there, elven enclaves held out, but the push southward displaced many other northern inhabitants, including the everlasting ones, trolls, who came down into the newly cleared lands northeast of Nemor's hold, these lands now known as the Trollmoors. Nemor died of old age during this time of increasing danger. Younger warlords led the men of Waterdeep, for so the ship captains called the harbour, in the battles against the trolls. There were many bloody struggles between men and trolls for a decade, until the magic of a northern youth named Garion turned the fortunes of war against the trolls, and the everlasting ones were destroyed or scattered. Agarion rose slowly in skill and power with the passage of years, until he became a great mage. He discovered a supply of potions of longevity, or learned the art of making such, for he lived on, still physically a man in his prime, for decade upon decade. Fearing further attacks, the men of Waterdeep raised a small keep on the slopes of Mount Waterdeep above their farms, where fire arrows from on high could defend against attacking trolls. Many outlying tribes who had come to the settlement for safety from the trolls stayed and expanded the walls with new farms several times. Warlords ruled the free city of Waterdeep, holding it independent and increasingly wealthy as the years passed. Okay, so the reason why there are so many trolls all over the place, even around Am, is essentially the trolls were living in the north, the orcs expanded, the trolls lost their initial land, tried to come to Waterdeep, were destroyed at Waterdeep, and now there's just roaming bands of them everywhere. Interesting. Okay. So we're getting more of a history of how everything's working in the world. And that probably also explains why there's gnomes that are kind of scattered and not really attached to places, because the gnomes also lost their lands at the same time. Or probably peacefully joined different groups. Okay, let's go with number 4. History of Waterdeep, Age 3, The Bloody Reign of the Guildmasters. There was great turmoil in the city as the guildmasters argued among themselves as to who should govern the city, and more than one merchant of power was found murdered. Groups of liveried bodyguards appeared openly armed on the streets, accompanying their masters, and 2 very troubled months passed as they bickered and parleyed, and occasionally duelled in the streets. At last they decided that all masters should rule Waterdeep together in a council. The lesser nobles and many townsfolk protested, saying that the lords ruled by right and by the people's consent. The guildmasters, however, said that the lords had not been seen since Agarian's death, and that they must have been golems or zombies controlled by Agarian to conceal his lone rule. And indeed the lords were silent and unseen, and continued to be so. In truth, the lords were real men and women whose identities had been compromised over the years by certain curious guildmasters who had ordered them slain by their own close-mouthed, loyal servants following Agarian's death. The only lords still surviving, those who had remained secret, were Baron, a woodworker, and Shilam, an apprentice wizard. These surviving lords kept very quiet and waited. The guildmasters thought all the living lords of the city had been eliminated and took firm rule over Waterdeep. The guildmasters ruled Waterdeep for only 6 years ere their self-interested squabbling led to bloodshed. Open quarrels and a few murders quickly erupted into a brief but vicious series of street fights and midnight attacks. This strife, oftentimes termed the Guild Wars by sages, although it was never a long drawn out or so formal as to be called a war when it was taking place, left all but 2 guildmasters dead, most of the city's best mines stilled, and much of the city's gold wasted or plundered within the guilds in disarray. The 2 surviving guildmasters were Lahore Gildeg, the shipwrights of the shipwrights, and Elem Zor of the gem cutters. These 2, ruthless manipulators both, were well matched and could not overcome each other, though their private armies clashed often in the streets. At length they sickened of bloodshed after many from both families were dead in the gutters and agreed to rule together. 2 thrones were set up in Castle Waterdeep, and from then on the 2 argued bitterly over this and that, and the city was a place of tension and fear. All matters, including the recognition of new guildmasters to rule the headless guilds, had to come before the 2 Lord Magister, as Lahore and Elem were called. Few matters were settled. And now we're going to see what happens after that, and how they settled that. Okay. Age 2, the Lord's rule begins. In his 112th winter, Agarian had a sharp disagreement with Rowlor, who was then warlord of Waterdeep. Rowlor wanted to use Waterdeep's acquired wealth and strength of arms to create a northern empire, with Waterdeep its capital, and Rowlor its ruler, and gathered armies for the purpose. Agarian defied him before all the people, and Rowlor ordered the mage to be chained. Agarian magically struck aside all who sought to lay hands on him. In a fury, Rowlor struck the mage with his own blade. Agarian rose into the air just out of reach, and as the infuriated warlord slashed repeatedly at his rising feet, gestured. Rowlor's blade transmuted in his hand from steel into a hissing serpent, which then promptly bit him. The warlord died of the venom before the shocked people assembled there. Agarian then gathered all the captains of Waterdeep's army and all the seniors of the families of Waterdeep. While runners sought to bring them to the castle, flames roared and crackled in the warlord's empty chair of state at Agarian's bidding, so that no one sat there. Then, at a gesture from the mage, the flames were gone as though they had never been, leaving the chair unmarked. Agarian seated himself then, and proclaimed himself the first Lord of Waterdeep, saying that henceforth wisdom and not armed might would rule the city. He would gather some few in secret to rule as lords with him, masked and disguised when they appeared to the people, but equal to him in authority and free of coercion by any, himself included. These lords were to be drawn from all walks of life in the city, and would serve as long as they wished. The people heard and agreed, and for the next 200 years, Agarian ruled over Waterdeep with his unknown fellow lords. Over the years, the masked lords were a group of sometimes 5, 6, or 7 who appeared seldom and said little. Some whispered that they were Agarian's servants, or even magical automatons controlled by the old mage. Still, Agarian's justice was swift and fair, his laws good, his guardsmen polite, and just as ready to help as apprehend, and the people approved. The years passed in peace and prosperity. The north was open to humans. Roads built under Agarian's direction linked it together from the ruins of the fallen kingdom, which had been shattered by the goblin race's attacks before men were numerous in the north, to the cities that would later become Amn. Waterdeep grew fivefold in size and wealth. From all over the realms, folk began to come to the Crown of the North, drawn by money, and among them came those who rob, cheat, and steal. When word of doings extended beyond simple theft to deception and workmanship, and the appearance of many fly-by-night impostor craftsmen reached Agarian's ears, he called together the senior merchants, the noble ones, and suggested that they form guilds, as was done in the far south, to police the unscrupulous of their own professions. Some resisted or were furious, but most saw the advantages of such an arrangement, particularly if they were free to set matters up themselves and not have less favourable arrangements forced upon them. The guilds were created forthwith. Twice more the city walls were expanded as Waterdeep continued to grow in size and prosperity. Its merchants travelled the world over, bringing back exotic goods from afar and spreading word of the city's wealth to remote lands. In the south, some listened with an eye to conquest, or at least plunder, but swords were already out in those southern lands in a time of widespread strife, and no invaders came. Agarian's health eventually failed and he died. He was buried with ceremony in his tower, which was secured against thieves and fools. Those who had learned the arts arcane from the old mage cast the most potent protective magics known upon his home and resting place, which many believe remains inviolate today. Okay. So a lot of information on this Agarian fellow. It's a little bit jumping back and forth, this story, but essentially we're getting the tale of how Waterdeep came together and how effectively this one mage decided that actually he was going to organize it and he was going to grow Waterdeep in his vision. Interesting. So that was 5, I think, which means that we're on to 6, which might be our last one. Just double checking. Yes, 6. Age 4, the return of the lords. One day, to the courts of the Lord Magister came 2 people masked and robed as lords of Waterdeep of old. Where they came from no one knew, but they appeared in the castle's great hall where the courts were, and commanded the Lord's Magister to leave the city forthwith. Laughing, the Lord's Magister refused, whereupon the shorter of the masked intruders, the Lady Shilam, apprenticed to Agarian and his undeclared heir as the first lord of the city, blasted them with lightning and fire, and their very thrones were shattered and toppled. The taller of the 2 intruders, Baron, then called for the heads of the noble houses to come to them, or leave the city forthwith and forever. And if they cared not to come by nightfall, all in the courts heard, and the news was cried in the streets. The surviving nobles came reluctantly, and with bodyguards, expecting such a summons to be a trap. Baron spoke to them, and the crowd of curious townsfolk that had also come, saying, "This must not happen again." If Waterdeep was to be safe once more, he told them, all must support what he and his fellow lord now planned, as they had supported Agarian in the past. The 2 would choose others to be lords as before, he said, and they would rule in secret as before, save for himself. He removed his mask and said, "I am Baron, and I would be lord as Agarian was before, and I would be safe in this my city again." And the folk of Waterdeep there agreed. Shilarn, still masked, commanded that the houses of the 2 lords magister be outcast. There was protest, and she raised her hands that had blasted the thrones, and it was still again. And the house of Gildeg and of Zor were outcast. Peace returned to the city, and the Waterhavians to their labours. To inhibit discovery of who the lords were, Baron selected certain men of character, whom he knew well, and appointed them magisters, black robes they were soon called for the robes of office, under the lords, to judge and apply the laws of Waterdeep in daily affairs. These magisters he paid well, to raise them from temptation, and gave them lodgings to those who feared for safety to dwell among the people. To so serve, he told the city, was a burden, not a proud misuse of authority, and if any wished to no longer serve, or were found wanting, they were not to be vilified, but accorded respect. And over the magisters the lords sat in their court to correct and overrule the judgments of the magisters. Beron told the people that none were to decry or belittle the judgments of the magisters that the lords saw fit to alter or cast aside, and if any thought ill of the offices or of those who held them, they could turn back to the rule of the sword and whim, and perish as those had before them. Before the Lord's court, Beron encouraged people to speak freely for the length of a short candle's burning, without fear of chastisement or reproach from the Lords or anything said, as long as they spoke openly and answered questions or opposing views put to them by any there. Thus he held, just grievances of the folk would be heard, and no matter how small the matter or lowly the speaker. And so it was, slow to take hold until the people knew it for careful justice, but enduring beyond Beron's time and beyond Shilarn's time, and beyond the time of their daughter Lestin, the masked lady who wed Zeplar, Arunson of Neverwinter, and was the mother of Kelbin Blackstaff Arunson, a lord of Waterdeep today, and who knows the secrets of long years as Agarian did. As the years have passed, Waterdeep has grown in size and variety, flourishing with good trade under the tolerance and protection of strong defenders and good government. The years passed not without troubles, varying from the Gods' War, when Waterdeep played host to gods dying and ascending, to occurrences such as a green dragon assailing the Field of Triumph, part of a ploy by the Knights of the Shield to overthrow the Lord's rule. But the city and her people survived and prevailed against all strife. The Lord's alliance provided continued safety for all the settlements of the northern Sword Coast, and those inland, with Waterdeep as the heart of the alliance. Though it can be matched in size or commerce, there is no city in the realms over that compares to the sheer variety of life and experiences found in fair Waterdeep. Crown of the North. Okay, huge amount of information on Waterdeep. It sounds like an interesting place. I don't know if any games were set in Waterdeep. I know obviously that games are set in Neverwinter, as Neverwinter Nights is a thing. But yeah, I don't know whether there was any set in Waterdeep. It'd be interesting to see, because it sounds, like a neat place with a lot of political movings. But cool. That is everything that we are going to learn about Waterdeep. And we're now going to put all of these books... Oh no, I'm picking up the books from the table. That's the wrong way round. Right. Put the books on the table. And now, let me have a look at what might be coming next. So, we have History of the North, which is 5, 7, 8, 6, 10, and 9. That's a lot of histories. And then we have a bunch of handwritten notes. Okay, so I'm sure we've read all of these. Yes. We've read all of these. These are all clues to something. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what these are clues to. So we're going to keep them around. So History of the North is next. So let's get all of these out. So that's 7, 5... So it's 8, 5, 7, 6, 10, and 9. Okay, so we've got... Let me just try and put these in order. So the latest we got is 10, right? Yeah, so we got 10, 9. Just going to do these backwards. 7, 8, 6, 5. So we got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which means that I'll just chuck that away.
I simply have no room.
Okay.
Your item is on the ground.
Which now means that we need 4, 3, 2, and 1. which I realized I actually didn't even need to move the potion to get. Okay. History of the North. We have 1. Okay, that's good. We can probably sort out the histories of Waterdeep in a second. History of the North 2, 3, and now I just need the History of the North 4. History of the North 4. History of the North 7. 4 is what we're looking for. Okay, you do not have that History of the North. Are we missing History of the North 4? That should be 1, 2, 3. Yes, we just need 4. So this one? History of the North 7. Histories of Waterdeep. History of Tathir. Right. It's all fine. Some of these we have definitely already read, which is good news. Okay. 3. Aha! 4. There we go. And there's no History of the North 11, right? Just to be certain. Not that we have. Okay. So let's move that over here. So that should be all the histories of the North. Ooh, that's a lot. You know, I think I'm going to put a cut in the video here, and I am going to move all of the books that we've already read into the container, and then we'll have a better idea when we come back as to what is going on. Right, so I have put all of the books that we have read, or we are about to read, into this table here. So now we can move on to the history of the North, starting with part 1. The First Flowering. For millennia, Gold Elves dwelt in Ilfarn, where Waterdeep now stands, and Irlan along the river Shinning. From their ornate forest cities, they traded with emerging human nations like Netherell and Illusk, and repulsed the attacks of the goblin races. Meanwhile, dwarven clans united as the nation of Delzuin, named for the dwarf who forged the Union. The nation, existing primarily underground, extended from the Ice Mountains to the Nether Mountains. Silvermoon Pass was its western border, and the Narrow Sea its eastern shore. Orcs came from north the spine of the world, but were turned back in great slaughter by the elves. To this day, this is the homeland and stronghold for orcs and similar races. Oh, that's it. Okay, so fairly straightforward. Right at the start, Gold Elves live in Ilfarn, which is Waterdeep, so I assume they don't live there, and Irlan, so maybe they live there now. And then they're trading with Netherell and Illusk, and then the Dwarven clans have their place, and then the orcs and goblins and so forth are at the other side of the spine of the world. Cool. Let's see what happens next. The Crown Wars. Humans immigrated in bands from the Shining Sea and up to the Sword Coast. They became seafarers, striking out across the waves to the Moonshaes, Mintarn, Ruthim, and the Northern Islands. Elves engaged in unceasing war against each other, with the humans and orcs taking over the resulting ruins. Perhaps the greatest calamity to befall the fair folk was the Dark Disaster, a killing magic that took the form of a dark, burning cloud. It enshrouded the kingdom of Mayuritar, and when it faded away some months later, not an elf lived, nor were trees left, only an open, blasted moor, the High Moor. Okay. All was not dark for the elves. Although in retreat, as barbarian humans and orc hordes grew in strength, their power rose in the elven court and Everesca, remaining a stronghold to this day. They conceived of cooperation between dwarves, kindly humans, and other elves for mutual survival against orcs, marauding humans, and the tides of beasts, ogres, bugbears, trolls, goblins, gnolls, and other non-human creatures, led by the rising power of giants. Astonishingly, in at least 3 places, the Fallen Kingdoms and the cities of Silvery Moon and Mithranor, they succeeded with shining grace. To the east, on the sandy shores of the calm and shining Narrow Sea, human fishing villages grew into small towns, and then joined together as the nation of Netherell. Sages believe the fishing towns were unified by a powerful human wizard who discovered a book of great magic power that had survived from the days of thunder. A book that legends call the Nether Scrolls. Under this nameless wizard and those who followed, Netherrealm rose in power and glory, becoming both the first human land in the north and the most powerful. Some say this discovery marked the birth of human wizardry, since before then mankind had only shamans and witch doctors. For over 3,000 years, Netherrealm dominated the north, but even its legendary wizards were unable to stop their final doom. Okay, so from where we were before, dwarves are pretty much in the same place, but the main players that changed were the elves. Because the elves fought between themselves, all of the things that they were holding back, like the orcs and the humans, basically took over some of their lands, and then they had to make alliances with friendly nations. Cool. And then the rise of Netherrealm. Okay. History of the North 3. The recent history of the North. Okay, so we're jumping quite a bit forward, because it was talking about the start of Netherrealm there, right? Or Netherrealm. And it was saying for over 3,000 years they dominated the north. So effectively, we're getting a 3,000 year time jump, I think. Is what's happening here. Anyway. In the waning summer months of 1367, an immense orc horde descended from the spine of the world, intent on winding its way south into the trade lands of the north. This force of orcs, led by King Grenier, surged its way south between the Moonwood and the Coldwood, stopping just outside the citadel of Many Arrows. King Obold, orc ruler of the citadel of Many Arrows, was terrified at the prospect of another orc horde, despite the fact that he knew they should be working together against the humans of the north and the spawn of Hellgate Keep. His tribal shamans, however, had been predicting a treacherous fall of the citadel, and they told the king that he'd be disposed of by other orcs. Thus, it was a dark day when King Grenier and his horde of 150,000 orcs appeared on the plains outside the citadel of Many Arrows. King Obold announced to his followers that this horde had been sent to dislodge them from their home and send them out to be scavengers among the plains. He vowed that, as Grumch as his witness, the citadel of Many Arrows would slaughter these treacherous orcs like elves during a festival. For 4 months, the 40,000 orcs within the citadel held their ground. Assault after assault was mounted against the high walls of the garrison, but the attacking orcs were losing far more than the defenders. Still, the living conditions within the walls, never too good to begin with, created losses of their own. The battle for the citadel of Many Arrows culminated during the first week of Uktar. As another light blanket of snow sought to bury the gathered orcs, King Grenier threw his entire remaining army at the citadel, bursting its gates and pitting orc against orc in a flurry of swords. As the two orc kings sought one another out along the ramparts, the citadel began to burn. The orcs that survived the battle still speak of the extraordinary prowess of the two kings as they battled one another before their troops. Finally, however, King Obold ran Grenier through with his longsword, but Obold was severely wounded by the time Grenier had breathed his last breath. The orcs erupted into battle once again, and no one is quite certain what became of King Obold. It was through the smoke and snow that the victors of the conflict emerged, the dwarves of Clan Warcrown along with a contingent of troops from Silverymoon. Charging in through the shattered gates, these new attackers quickly routed the exhausted orcs of the citadel, sending them scurrying off into the wilderness. King Emirus Warcrown now rules the citadel of Many Arrows, though the dwarves now call the city by its old name of Felbar. Most in the north still tend to refer to the city as the citadel, however, waiting to see if it can withstand the next orc horde. King Warcrown has put out a call for all dwarves to help defend the citadel, and news of a new vein of gold and silver is spreading rapidly through dwarven communities. Okay, so this is once again some infighting within a race has led to someone else taking advantage. So the orcs that had come down from the spine of the world started fighting each other, and then the dwarves have taken advantage. So really, actually, it just seems like everything's coming out great for the dwarves. Into Book 4. The dwarves have a problem. Let's have a look at Book 4. The Elven Exodus, never mind, still seems pretty good for dwarves. This era left behind elven strongholds ripe for pillaging by humans and orcs. When the elves chose to leave the north and travel to Evermeet, their works quickly disappeared, leaving only places like the Old Road and a ruined port in the High Forest to mark Erland's passing. And yet it was not only the elves who would disappear from their long-held homes. The human nation of Netheril also stood on the brink of history. Doom for Netheril came in the form of a desert, devouring the narrow sea and spreading to fill its banks with dry dust and blowing sand. Legend states that when the great wizards of Netheril realized their land was lost, they abandoned it and their countrymen, fleeing to all corners of the world and taking the secrets of wizardry with them. More likely, this was a slow migration that began 3,000 years ago and reached its conclusion 1,500 years later. Whatever the truth, the wizards no longer dwelled in Netheril. To the north, the once majestic dwarven stronghold of Del Zuen fell on hard days. Never mind, the dwarves are having problems. Then the orcs struck. Orcs have always been foes in the north, surging out of their holes every few tens of generations when their normal haunts can no longer support their burgeoning numbers. This time they charged out of their caverns in the spine of the world, poured out of abandoned mines in the Grey Peaks, screamed out of lost dwarf holds in the Ice Mountains, raged forth from crypt complexes in the Nether Mountains, and stormed upwards from the bowels of the high Moon Mountains. Never before or since has there been such an outpouring of orcs. Del Zuen crumbled before this onslaught and was driven in on itself. Netheril, without its wizards, was wiped from the face of history. The Erlane elves alone withstood the onslaught, and with the aid of the treants of Turlang and other unnamed allies, they were able to stave off the final days of their lands for yet a few centuries more. Okay, so this happened before the previous book that we read. So this is a bunch of dwarven land was taken by the orcs, as was Netheril taken by the orcs, and that's why they were saying that when the dwarves took back that citadel, they named it by its old name, which would have been what they had before these orcs came and took it. That's at least my reading of it anyway. In the east, Erlan built the fortress of Askelhorn and turned it over to the refugees from Netheril as Nezari's followers built the town of Kars in the High Forest. The fleeing Netherese founded Lork and Loudwater. Others wandered the mountains, hills, and moors north and west of the High Forest, becoming ancestors of the Uthgard and founders of Silvery Moon, Everlund, and Sundabar. Okay, Book 5. The Spread of Humankind. The adaptable humans made use of magic they could seize or learn from the proud peoples to defeat all enemies, breaking, for a time, the power of giants and orcs. Waterdeep was founded. The last of the pure-blood elves died out, a result of continued marriages with humans. In the far west, men also dwelled, wise, clever primitives called the Ice Hunters. They lived simple lives on the coast since time beyond reckoning, countless generations before Netheril's first founders set foot on the narrow sea's western shore. Yet, this peaceful folk fell prey to another invasion from the south, crude longships that carried a tall, fair-haired, warlike race who displaced the Ice Hunters from their ancestral lands. This race, known as the Northmen, spread farms and villages along the coast from the banks of the winding water to the gorges of the Mirar. Northman warriors drove the simple Ice Hunters farther and farther north, forced the goblin kind back into the goblin kin back into their mountain haunts, and instigated the last council of Ilfarn. Within 500 years of the Northmen's arrival, Ilfarn was no more, its residents had migrated to Evermeet. From the coast, Northmen sailed westward, claiming and establishing colonies on the major western islands of Ruthim and Gundolun, eventually spreading to all islands in the Northern Sea. Others migrated northward, past the spine of the world, and became the truly savage barbarians of Icewind Dale. In the centuries that followed, Askelhorn became Hellgate Keep when it fell into the hands of fiends, and Erlan collapsed under the attack of a new orc horde. The elves fled southeast, joining with the Northmen, Netherese descendants and dwarves to form what would later be known as the Fallen Kingdom. This realm was short-lived and collapsed under the next Orcish invasion, though in dying it dealt the goblin races a blow from which they have yet to recover. Book 6 about to go over that. The Might of Men. Along the coast, in what was once the elven community of Ilfarn, humanity was once again rising in power. Merchants from the south, tribesmen from the north, and seafarers from western islands had created a village around a trading post on a deep water harbour, first known as Nemours Hold after the Uthgard chieftain whose tribe seized and fortified the ramshackle village. Nemours and his successors, known as warlords, led the men of Waterdeep, as it has become known to ship captains, in a slowly losing battle against the trolls. In a final climactic battle, the trolls breached the aging palisade, and all seemed lost until the magic of Agarian of Silvermoon turned luck against the trolls, destroying and scattering them. Agarian, heir to the heritage and learning of Netheril, stayed in Waterdeep, and in his 112th year he again saved the city, this time from itself. In doing so, he created the Lords of Waterdeep. The city grew into the greatest in the north, possibly in all Faerun. With Waterdeep as a firm anchor, civilization forged cautiously into the wilderness. Luskan, now Luskan, was taken from the orcs. Loudwater, Lork, Tribor, Longsaddle, Secomber, and other towns were settled by pioneers from Waterdeep, sponsored by Waterhavian merchant families. Though it's been centuries since the last orc invasion, there's still constant strife. Barbarians harass merchants, travellers, and towns. The seas swim with Northman pirates, and wars have marred the land in recent years. Luskan, now a fierce merchant city known to harbour and support pirates, waged a war with the island realm of Ruthim over an act of piracy against one of the few legitimate Luskan merchant ships. The war raged for nearly a year, with Ruthim slowly losing ground. When it appeared Luskan would finally win the naval war and land on the island itself, the Lords' Alliance entered the fray. They threatened war against Luskan if the skirmishes didn't stop immediately. Unable to fight a two-front war efficiently, Luskan cancelled its invasion plans. Tensions between Luskan and Ruthim are still high, and their ships are often seen taking potshots at each other as they pass, often just a wave or two away from each other. The government of Ruthim has recently been sending adventurers into the hills of its island realm, looking for mercenaries who are killing merchants, farmers, and woodsmen. Ruthim believe that Luskan still has a presence on the island, trying to win through subversion and terrorism, what it could not accomplish through war. To the far north, the 10 towns have finished rebuilding after being nearly destroyed by the monstrous forces of Akar Kessel. With help from the tundra barbarians living nearby, they've built and repaired their cities, replanted the sparse foliage, and, most importantly, replenished the morale of their citizens. A recent trader who passed through the area carrying 17 wagons of rare oak lumber said that it was nearly impossible to determine who's a barbarian and who isn't. "They're living together," he reported in amazement. Okay. So there's a lot of different events happening. I'm wondering whether these were all like whatever they're called in D&D, whether they were like adventure paths, as in whether these were all like campaign books that you could buy, and that's why there's so many like random events that are happening between these different nations. It's like these are things that you could have got involved in if you were, if you bought the right campaign. Yeah, I'm guessing that's what a lot of these are, actually. Like there was a war between these two people, and then this happened, and this happened, and then this happened, and now they're looking for adventurers, and it's like, so it's the setup for a campaign. But still, cool. So that was 6. Now we're on to 7? Double check. Yes. 1368, the Year of Banner. Again, these are just written completely randomly. Things are just like, this happened here, 3,000 years forward, 2,000 years back, and now we're in present day. But anyway, Year of the Banner. As the dwarves settled in for the winter in the reclaimed city of Felbar, which was the citadel, a group of Zhentarim-sponsored adventurers broke into Great Worm Cavern, slaying Elrim the Wise, shaman leader of the Great Worm tribe. See, this is one where I'm like, this definitely sounds like that could be a campaign. Like, your job is to slay Elrim the Wise. You're sponsored by the Zhentarim, and you could see how you could build up a campaign from these things. Anyway, maybe I'm wrong. As the tribe's warriors descended into the ranks of the evil adventurers, teleportation magic spirited at least 3 of those responsible, as well as a vast amount of treasure stolen from Elrim to safety. According to Thurim, the tribe's present shaman, Elrim promised to watch over the tribe in spirit now that my mortal form is destroyed. Despite the reassuring words of Elrim, the tribe suffered through an oppressive winter that included both heavy snow, scarce game, and low morale. Trusted visitors to the barbarian encampment reported that Themrin and Gweshin, Iron Hand Talistars, are wearing some form of armor made from the scales of Elrim. This use of their former shaman's body as protection was supposedly ordained through a dream vision. The armor appears as little more than a supple leather armor, but appears to deflect blows and protect as well as full plate mail. Nesme reported a drastic rise in the number of troll attacks in the Evermoors, and various sources confirm that something is driving the trolls out of the moors. Whatever is behind the trolls' exodus is destined to remain a mystery for the remainder of the year, as adventuring parties expend themselves against the never-ending supply of trolls that are fleeing the bog. In the most surprising move of the year, the Blue Bear tribe, led by the shaman chieftain Tanta Hagara, marched on the fiend-ridden fortress of Hellgate Keep. While a brief struggle for political control of the city was reported by various sources, Tanta Hagara emerged as the new ruler of the city. Okay, cool. And now we're on to 8. Oh, is 1 year after the previous one. 1369 Year of the Gauntlet. That is 1 year after, right? Yes, okay. The tumultuous climate of Hellgate Keep continued to provide adventuring activity. A group of harpers infiltrated the city using cloaking magic and revealed that Tanta Hagara was actually an Anis. What is an Anis? I need to look that one up. Let me see whether I can get a ability to look that up. So Anis. D&D. Anis D&D. There we go. An Anis, sometimes specified as an Anis hag, was the most dreaded kind, spreading fear through fiction and ruling through it in reality. The child-eating hags were the undisputed queens of barbarism, combining the wicked cruelty of dark fae with the unbridled strength of evil giants. Yeah, that sounds bad. Okay. Right. This revelation did nothing to hamper the Blue Bears' respect for their powerful chieftain. However, and this city responded to the unmasking by attacking caravans en route to Sundabar. In addition, a few expeditionary forces of Tanarri were sent to harass the citadel of the Mists, Sundabar, and Silvery Moon. Tanta Hagara informed her loyal troops that gates existed in these cities that could allow other Tanarri to join us in the glorious battles to come as we take control of all of the north. Lustral cast powerful magical spells in defense of Silvery Moon against the raiding Tanarri, and the city itself suffered no damage from their attack. The Mist Master of the Citadel of the Mists likewise aided in the defense of his citadel, though reports still rage about the assistance of the treants from the High Forest. Sundabar suffered from Hellgate Keep's attack as the fiends broke through the walls and raised havoc along the city streets. While adventurers battled the fiends, Helm Dwarf-Friend led a large contingent of city guard to drive the remainder from Sundabar. Still, the fiends from Hellgate Keep left the city with the satisfaction of knowing that it was burning in their wake. Within 2 days, however, the fires were extinguished and Sundabar has since rebuilt from the attack. By mid Elistius rumors that Torlang, the powerful treant who resides in the northern high forest, was actively defending the woodlands near the Citadel of the Mists, reached the ears of Tanta Hagara, the hag ruler of Hellgate Keep. I guess we could have waited till we saw that to know what Ananas was. News that Turlang was aiding the Mistmaster did not escape her notice, and the belief that the Citadel of the Mist was holding an extraplanar artifact only added to the hag's interest. Tanta assembled a large force consisting of more than 100 Tenari, and other fiends as well as 500 members of the Blue Bear tribe to raise the Citadel of the Mists. But, as the evil forces marched their way into the high forest, the Mistmaster put his own plan into motion. 2 Harper agents, a bard named Krishana Fireglen and a priest of Mistra known as Spell Viper, infiltrated Hellgate Keep, disguised as members of the Blue Bear tribe. Each carried with them a part of an extraplanar artifact called the Gatekeeper's Crystal. The Gatekeeper's Crystal is an artifact shaped like a 3-pointed star that is made of onyx and an unknown metal that entwines itself through the gem. Each point of the star is a separate piece that can be combined together to create the artifact or separate to form 3 powerful magical items. While the crystal can be used in different manners, it was primarily created to bring down wards, including mythals and other powerful protections. According to legend, it was created by a powerful lich who used it to render clerics powerless, stripping them of their ability to turn undead and nullifying necromantic magic within a 50-mile radius. The Mistmaster had a different use for the Gatekeeper's Crystal, but he needed volunteers to aid him in placing 2 shards of the crystal at precise locations within the warded city of Hellgate Keep. In particular, he needed 2 people who would be willing to trade their lives to exterminate the fiends of Hellgate Keep forever. Spell Viper and Krishana agreed to the suicide mission. Holding the pieces of the crystal, the 2 Harpers waited for the Mistmaster to activate the magic with his 3rd piece, initiating the black magic that would tear Hellgate Keep asunder. When a blazing beam of purple energy illuminated the skies over the keep, no one within the field's stronghold had time to wonder what was happening. The power of the Gatekeeper's Crystal forced the wards to cascade upon the city, causing an implosion that shook the ground for more than 100 miles. As quickly as the wards surrounding Hellgate Keep collapsed, the crystal released the magical energy in an explosion that leveled every building in the city, leaving nothing but fist-sized chunks of rock where Hellgate Keep once stood. Not a living creature stirred in the remains. All was silent and lifeless. The force of Tenari from Hellgate Keep was unsure what had happened, but had felt the tremor when the Gatekeeper's Crystal had been activated. They were fighting for their own lives, however, as the treants, Cord, centaurs, satyrs, dryads, and other creatures of the high forest, including defenders of the Citadel of the Mist, battered them into the moist earth. One of the Norse most notable rulers fell in the battle, however, but he took at least 6 Tenari with him to his grave. Pharrell Blackhammer, the Lord Protector of Tribor, fell alongside his troops near the conclusion of the conflict. Within weeks after the final battle with Hellgate Keep, treants blocked passage farther north at the joining of the Heartblood and the Dilembir rivers. While the treants care little for hunters and adventurers passing through the area, all caravans seeking passage north to Sundabar have been repulsed, and this is not a matter that the treants wish to negotiate. In another mishap blamed on Turlang, Turnstone Pass was blocked by a tremendous avalanche. This final calamity sealed the upvale from any major force of men. Travel to the area formerly occupied by Hellgate Keep is now limited to adventurers and other brave travellers. The Mistmaster has been questioned repeatedly by some of the most powerful wizards in the realms, including Elminster of Shadowdale and Kelvin Arunson, about the current location of the Gatekeeper's Crystal. Both sources claim that the pieces of the crystal have been scattered among the plains again, but no one is certain. Near Nesme, the source of the Trolls' exodus is revealed. Fog and cloud giants have taken up residence in the moor, driving the Trolls from the giants' new homeland. While it's unknown how many giants have taken up residence in the High Moor, estimates range up to several hundred. A thick mist continually hangs in the air of the Evermoors now, even more persistent and thick than the mist before the giants' arrival. Many believe that these new mists are the work of cloud giants, but none can be certain. Illustriel of Silvermoon set a detachment of guards to investigate the eastern borders of the moor, and the guards returned with news that a gathering of around 20 fog giants who were of good nature and quite friendly had taken up residence in a formerly troll-infested area. Guards from neighbouring Nesme were not so fortunate, however, running into a clan of violent, boulder-hurling fog and cloud giants who nearly decimated their unit. In addition, a group of adventurers crawled into Nesme with terrible burns, reporting that they had run into a black dragon at a fog giant encampment. Overall, it appears that both good and evil giants now call the moor their home. Okay. And again, we've got more of like, the giants came and pushed the trolls out, which is why the trolls are everywhere kind of stuff going on. History of the North, Part 9. Return of the Beast, 1367 to something. So this starts before the previous two books that we read and goes on till potentially afterwards. Anyway. Sages, philosophers, historians, and priests alike feel an ill boding in the chill air. They predict a slow change over the next decade, but within the lifetime of men born on the first day of this age, they believe that beasts that once ruled the land plan to return to claim what's rightfully theirs, imprisoning and enslaving the crowns. Where elves once reigned, humans now rule, but their hold, as is true for all civilizations before, is tenuous at best. Okay, so this is suggesting that all of the people, or all of the trolls that have been displaced, all of the goblins that have been displaced, all of this sort of stuff, they're all going to come back and get their land, all the orcs as well. Okay. And now we have part 10. 1370, Year of the Tankard. So this one's directly following on from that one. Okay. Even before spring has graced the savage north, reports of treants massing in the high forest have reached all of the northern cities. It appears that all the creatures of the forest are mobilized to restore the high forest after the fall of Hellgate Keep. Something must still reside below the ruins of Hellgate Keep, however, for the company of the Jaded Heart never emerged from the depths below the city. The treants have since blocked entrance to the ruins, sealing whatever evil still lurks within, far below the sight of man. But there is other activity in the north as well. Luskan still flirts with war, tempting neighbouring cities, and yet staying just below the wrath of Waterdeep. The barbarians still brew in the north, quick to take offence at innocent incursions into their sacred holdings. Rumours of Zentarim agents scouring the fallen lands for powerful magic from long-lost Netheril continue to circulate, and adventurers still abound in the savage frontier. And with that, we've read the entirety of the history of the North, and I'm going to move all of those books onto the table, and then we're going to be back with the next set of books, which I think are going to be a little bit more generalized in topic. The books that we have next are kind of... actually, I think Jaheira has no books left. But the books that we have next, who I assume we're going to start on you, are kind of like histories of individual places rather than histories of like the North part 1 to 10. So it'll be like the entire history of one place in one book. So, we'll see how that works. Anyway, I'll put another cut in the video, and I'll see you once I put all the North books on the table. Right, so I have moved some books around, and we now have the scroll case that Felix had, and we have a ton of books to read. So, let's start with the first one. The History of Estegund. Estegund history follows a different path than those of Dupar and Var. The Gunders were conquered in 551 DR by Reinhard I, war chief of the Archaeuns of Dambrath, so 551 is like 800 years ago. Estegund regained its independence when Reinhard was slain by the Halruan archmage Mykontil, though the country soon degenerated into a group of small independent city-states. Skirmishes with Var and between city-states continued for several centuries until the king once again united the country. King Borneil was a skilled ruler, and under him Estegund began to prosper. His descendants did not share his wisdom, and in 1053 DR, about 300 years ago, King Selkarin more than illustrated this. He had failed to conquer Dupar, and Veldorn resisted his challenges. An avowed misogynist, Selkarin turned his attentions to the matriarchy of Dambrath. He led a large fleet to attack Dambrath, taking extreme losses, including his own life. Selkarin died childless, so his brother Seltarir was crowned king. The new ruler faced a country with most of its fighting men gone, and an unforeseen problem: famine. The famine was caused by a blight that wiped out nearly all the year's crops in Estegund. This made him eager for a deal posed by the Duparian merchant Geradim, and in a legendary trade the entire country of Estegund was sold. Contrary to popular rumour, Seltarir did not trade away the country for 24 pearls. In actuality, he received diamonds worth almost 1,000,000 gold pieces. This sudden wealth gave him an instant seat on the Council of Merchants, so he retained a measure of rule in addition to his fortune. Shaka Seltarir is still the richest Shaka in Estegund to this day. In the years that followed, the Gundars began rebuilding their lives under their new circumstance, and now they compete on equal footing with the merchants of Dupar and Var. Okay, so a merchant city and how it came to be sold. Okay. Next up we have History of the Bell in the Depths. One of the great and mysterious sites in the Moonsea area, the Bell in the Depths is connected with legendary Northkeep, an island kingdom that was the first great citadel of humankind in these cold lands. Northkeep was a great and magical city, and it was under the protection of these magics that humanity first began to press back the orc hordes and take command of the sea. The power of Northkeep made it an obvious target for orcs, giants, and other evil races. However, these creatures were not inclined towards sea actions, and Northkeep seemed safe until the day when, according to legend, 40,000 inhuman mages, shamans, witch doctors, and priests of all foul races gathered on the northern shore of the Moonsea and began to chant, bringing the vengeance of their gods down upon the human interlopers. The gods, at least some of them, came and destroyed their priests for disturbing them, but also sank Northkeep beneath the waves. I like how the gods are like, we're annoyed at you, so we're going to get rid of you, but we will do what you asked. The upper reaches of Northkeep, its slender now broken spires, can be seen beneath the water by boats that sail nearby. This is not attempted often, however, as the region is said to be haunted by the original defenders of Northkeep, seeking company in their watch over the cold lands. On fog-ridden nights, the bells of the tallest towers, despite being submerged, can be heard as far away as hills far. Interesting. Okay. We don't really have a lot on that so far, but maybe we'll hear more about Northkeep in one of the other ones. Now, Dupar and Var we've heard about, as they were mentioned specifically here. So, Dupar and Var. Dupar and Var, the Golden, share a common history. Over 3,000 years ago, these countries were both subject to the great kingdom of Rurin. When Rurin fell in minus 2488 DR, the countries of Dupar and Var barely survived the destruction. Rising mass destruction and hatred of nobility were rampant, and the two countries descended into barbarism for over 2 millennia. Finally, after most of the barbarian tribes were wiped out by the great empire of Mulhorand, a leader emerged. Satama, a mere trader, experienced a divine revelation and formulated a new philosophy. All things in the world were connected, were part of a single creation spirit, and all of the gods of the realms were merely parts of the same entity. Soon, all the Shining Lands embraced the teachings of Satama, and the seeds of civilization were laid in what came to be known as the Lands of the One. Since the Lands of the One had many natural resources, trade with Mulhorand and Lurien became a way of life. Merchants were honored above all. In time, the Maharaja of Dupar and the Raja of Var were replaced with a council of merchants. During this time, the land suffered occasional raiding attacks from the horsewomen of Dambrath, and had many skirmishes with the neighbouring countries of Estegund and Ulgarth. In 1023 DR, after an armed peace had been worked out with Ulgarth, the Council of Merchants decided that something needed to be done about the raiders from Estegund who were hurting trade with other countries. War was an inconvenience, but interrupting trade was life-threatening. Geradim, the richest merchant in the lands, was given power to negotiate a settlement. During these negotiations, he proved, at least in the eyes of the Duparians, that he was indeed the master trader he seemed. Estegund had just tried a foolish invasion of Dambrath. The vengeful female leaders of that land wiped out nearly every able-bodied fighting man they sent. The monsters of Veldorn were causing problems, and Estegund was going through a famine. It was here that Geradim showed his fine merchant's instincts. He could not pass up such an advantage, and began bargaining the most outrageous trade of all time. He met with the leaders of Estegund, a fearful king and his nobles, and explained the advantages of Durparian life and the philosophy of the Adama, the oneness of all things. He bargained for days until finally the king made the trade. He purchased the whole of Estegund for the countries of Dupar and Var at the price of 24 gems. He also promised protection and help for their integration into the Duparian way of life. Thus were formed the Shining Lands. Within 100 years, the three countries shared a common way of life. With the added strength and resources of Estegund, Duparian merchants increased their trading range. They roamed as far east as Karator, and as far north as the Sea of the Fallen Stars, and west to Dambrath and Halrua. At this present time, with the newly discovered lands of Maztika and Zakhara beckoning, the future looks bright. Okay, so that gave us more context on the Estegund stuff. Cool. The history of the Unicorn Run. Bards and sages pass down the tale that the headwaters of Unicorn Run are in truth the font of life and a cradle of fecundity. Each natural race is said to have emerged from the womb of Shontia onto Toril at the river's source and then travelled down the Unicorn Run to the outside world. Some say that a daughter of Shontia resides at the river's source to usher the newborns into the world, while others claim that Shiala midwifes the process. Regardless of the truth, the elves, Korrids, and halflings all agree that the Unicorn Run is sacred to life and a site of incredible purity. As a result, all three races have strong taboos about extended trips up the run, for if the river is ever fouled, then no new races will ever be born on Toril again. Okay, a little bit of a creation story there. Next up we have the history of Ulgarth. So we've heard about Ulgarth and some of the other ones as well. Ulgarth was settled by the great empire of Rorin in the height of its power. When the empire was destroyed, it endured centuries of barbarism. War chiefs united the country several times during this period. They fought many skirmishes with other barbarians, particularly those in Dupar and Var the Golden. In 202 DR, the barbarian tribes were nearly wiped out by the forces of Mulhorand. In 348 DR, a group of outlaws fleeing the justice of the priest kings of Mulhorand came to Ulgarth. There they found a fertile, almost unoccupied land. They settled down and began raising children and crops. This new society in Ulgarth gradually grew in power, while its neighbours grew apace. But while Dupar grew as a result of its commerce and its philosophy of balance, Ulgarth concentrated on agrarian pursuits. The Ulgarthians developed a highly structured caste system of lords and peasants. In 1002 DR, the centuries-long skirmishes between Dupar and Ulgarth came to an end, as the two countries finally reached a balance of power. There were too many centuries of warfare between the countries for them to completely trust each other. With their mutual border well defended on both sides, the countries have given up on the idea of conquering each other. Trade between the Ulgarth and the Shining Lands has become a vital factor to both nations. Ulgarth produces many of the items that Duparians trade throughout the world. In return, Dupar trades many exotic items to Ulgarth. Of course, the Duparian merchants usually get the better of any trade. The current king, Drasna the Fortunate, has continued his predecessor's policy of non-aggression with the Duparians. Okay, so now we know who they are. Next up, the history of Dambrath. So this is the matriarchy. The nation of Dambrath was formed out of a barbarian kingdom almost half a millennia ago by a powerful alliance of a priestess of Lovitar and the drow from the city of Tillintet. In 211 DR, fleeing from the destruction of their homeland by the then great kingdoms of Unthur and Mulhorand, 4 tribes of barbarians entered Dambrath. They found a coast where the dolphins danced and plains where the grass was long. They roamed from the borders of the walls of Hulrua as far east as the current borders of Estegund. They soon became known as the Arkayun, or People of the Wind. In 545 DR, a great war chief Reinhar rose to lead the tribes. The halflings of Lurien were quickly enslaved, and several of the coastal cities of Dupar were captured or razed. Estegund fell to his rule, and eventually Reinhar turned his attention to Halarua. An army of 40,000 horsemen and a fleet of 50 ships mounted a coordinated attack, and even though Reinhar was able to get beyond the walls of Halrua and occupy the cities of Mithil, Gladel, and Zalzu, their magics proved to be more than a match for the invaders. Reinhar was eventually defeated in a great battle at Sulazir by the archmage Mycontil and his troop of wizards. Reinhar's son, Reinhar II, took command of the army and set out on a 2-month overland retreat. He arrived home with 1,000 surviving fighting men and no shaman. Reinhar II proved to be as good a ruler in defeat as his father was in war. He consolidated his forces and pulled home almost all of his troops, as he knew that the defeat made them tempting prey for raiders and encroaching monsters. This action allowed the safe development of his people. By the time the 9th Reinhar was king in 802 DR, the Arkayuns were fat and lazy. Reinhar IX, or Reinhar the Foolish as he is more commonly known, insisted on expanding his nation to gain more gold to finance his military campaigns. He ordered the mining of many rich lodes of silver and electrum in the No Watch Mountains, but before his plans of expansion could begin, the miners encountered the drow of Tillintet. The drow were outraged and began a steady series of raids and attacks on the Arkayun strongholds. While villages were destroyed overnight, and no trace of the invaders, or whole villages were destroyed overnight and no trace of the invaders could be found. Reinhar IX committed the foolhardy action of attacking the drow in retaliation. While the Arkayuns managed to get a force into the drow city, this action only succeeded in uniting the normally chaotic drow. For once, the full power of a drow city was turned against an enemy. The battle quickly moved back to the surface. Reinhar's raiders were wiped out, leaving Reinhar with only a small portion of his original military. This was not enough for the drow, who demanded total enslavement of the entire surface nation. The Arkayuns resisted valiantly, and the war went on for 3 decades at tremendous cost in life to both sides. Finally, the drow had the Arkayun forces cornered at Malduer. Almost without hope, the defenders were overjoyed when a group of half-elven pilgrims appeared on the scene. The high priestess, Kathar Shintar, offered the aid of her clerics to help defend the city, and Reinhar took this to be an omen from the gods. A priestess was placed with almost every company. Within a 10-day, the drow struck. The priestesses did indeed prove to be of great aid, but to the drow. Every priestess turned on the Arkayuns, and Kathar herself slew Reinhar. The drow were still weakened by the battle, and only the presence of the priestesses enabled them to win. Kathir, realizing the unique advantage she possessed, made a deal that even the suspicious drow embraced. Her priestesses would rule the land, and in exchange they would provide access to the surface for the drow, trading weapons, slaves, and supplies. The drow were delighted with this brazen offer from the surface dweller. Reinhar had been slain and the insults avenged, and after 30 years of war the drow were not particularly interested in Dambrath. They did insist, however, on taking the best captured males as slaves. Kathir quickly agreed to this, seeing the males as an obstacle to her own power. Caithere ruled for 205 years. She fulfilled her promise to make Dambrath, or the Nation of Pain, a bastion of evil in the realms. In her time, Caithere saw the priesthood of Lovitar expand to thousands, and faith in the beast lords previously worshipped by the Archaeans was nearly eradicated. Many of the Archaeans were able to escape their new mistresses and flee to Swagdar. What a name! There they resumed their almost forgotten nomadic life. The priestesses of Lovitar continued to enjoy good relations with the Drow, and some even took mates, creating a race of Drow half-elves. These dark half-elves became known as the Sinthrai, or Noble Ones. Most are priestesses of Lovitar, though many are mages as well. They consolidated their power, learning much of the area from the Shibali, or Lower Ones, as the Archaeans are now called. The capital of Dambrath was established at Caithere, built after Caithere's passing and named in her honour. Her death came at the hands of her daughter, Philina, who had grown tired of waiting for her mother to die. Philina ruled for only 5 years, however, before her own daughter, Catheke, assumed the throne in the same fashion. Catheke ruled for 54 years, eventually falling in battle against a gold dragon. She died childless, and her niece, Melanthith, assumed the throne. Melanthith faced an increasing population and unrest among males who longed for a return to their prestige of old. Melanith did not return their previous status, but she did make use of them. Fearing that the great nations of Mulhorand and Unthir might rise again, she decided that the men would handle mundane tasks, such as the defence of the kingdom. She was the first to name a male to the post of war chief. Sadalar, a Sinthrai, became the queen's consort. Widespread bribery and corruption characterized his term as war chief. He was, however, responsible for getting many privileges returned to the Archaeans. After Melanith's rule, the Shibali were considered second-class citizens rather than slaves. Though males were granted more power during her rule, Melanith also solidified the split between the sexes. While the rulers of Barath had been females for over 2 centuries, it was more because of competence than gender. Melanith, however, decreed that men could have no authority except over other men. The female-led hierarchy of Lovitar was quick to back this move. Many of the bravest and best men of the kingdom perished in the raids on Estegund, Dupar, and the bandit tribes of Veldorn, and against the Gnolls who had returned to the Knollwatch Mountains. Some even fought at the side of the Drow in their battle with the Surfneblen city of Aventine. The deep gnomes were destroyed, but so were the Shibali. The Drow and the Sinthrai were largely unharmed, and further aid, the Sinthrai were rewarded with a number of Drow males to breed in their race. Melanith took a Drow male as her consort to replace Sadalar, who had perished in the conflict. The Drow, Nim Inthig, fathered 3 daughters and a son. It was at this point that Melanith began the isolationist policy that Dambrath still follows today. Melanith ruled for 156 years, her daughter Ositil for 125. The current queen of Dambrath is known as, or is, Yenandra. She is known there as the Pirate Queen, for she has sailed as far south as Zakara on pillaging raids. Yenandra has been ruling for 71 years and is beginning to show signs of age. She has 3 daughters as well, named Lutharin, Melturel, and Hasafir. While she does remain extremely popular, especially to the Sinthrai, the children of the leaders in this land are not known to patiently wait their turn. Okay, interesting nation that we've got here. Okay, and a lot more about Drow than we've heard before. Cool. Next we have the history of the Moonsea. The Moonsea has a long history as the border between the elven lands to the south and the darker, more sinister lands of the Ride and Thar, home of dragons and giant and ogre tribes in great multitudes. The deep sea was an excellent barrier to the raiders, as those tribes who sought invasion had to detour around and through the lands that would eventually hold Ulash, Zintil Keep, and Hillsfar. The first true settlement in Moonsea was North Keep, a shining citadel established as a beacon of civilization and a jumping-off point for merchants seeking trade with the dwarves of the north, including not only Tethayamar, but the clans of the Cold Lands, who traded their metalwork and craft for much-needed magic. In the end, North Keep was sunk beneath the icy waters of the Moonsea by the inhuman forces, and humankind suffered one of many setbacks in the region. So has been the nature of human habitation of this region since the beginning. Human settlements thrive for a few years, usually through sheer willpower and on the strength of a sharp sword, and then are overrun by goblins, orcs, dragons, beholders, or giants. Flan has fallen and risen again. Ulash is a ruin where a decade ago it was a thriving town. Hulburg and Sulasprin are empty husks. Each of the cities in the Moonsea seems threatened with extinction in its turn, and is then rebuilt. This cycle may be the reason that only the strongest and most savage survive, even prosper in the lands of the Moonsea. The greatest cities, Hillsfar, Mulmaster, and the impenetrable Zentil Keep, are all ruled by evil people who control their lands with iron grips. The lesser cities, Elventree, Flan, and Thentia, may be less evil, but have a strong, independent, almost chaotic nature. In many ways, the Moonsea is a frontier, with a frontier mentality. Cool. Next up we have the history of the fateful coin, which I think is is no longer talking about geographical regions or nations. This is just about a coin. Old tales tell that luck plays a crucial role in each person's life. When each newborn baby enters the realms, Timora flips a coin formed from the remnants of the original goddess of luck, Taichi. Beshaba calls it in the air, the moon heads, or the cloak tails. If Beshaba is right, that person is cursed with misfortune for the rest of his or her days. If she's wrong, Lady Luck smiles on that child for the rest of his or her life. For some rare beings, the coin lands edge on, and these luckless few can forge their own fates, for they have more freedom over their destinies than the powers themselves. So actually, no, this one is still it's not about a single thing. It's about it's more religion stuff. Okay, cool. That's first line. Now the history of Kalimshan. So another nation. Kalimshan is older than either of the other empires of the Sands, first settled over 7,000 years ago by the Degen, a humanoid race from the elemental plane of air. These Degen were known to be very magical, and during the course of their rule they developed many new spells previously not available in the plane of air. The Degen prospered for over 1,000 years in Kalimshan, but their reign was ended by an invasion of creatures and minions from the plane of fire. Some say this is where the bitter hatred between Genie and Ifriti started, though others contend this was just a result of hatred that was already there. Whatever the cause, the battle was long and bloody and took over 100 years to complete. The Degen finally routed the attackers, but were greatly weakened in the attempt. They slowly declined, and the last mention of the Degen is just under 6,000 years ago. For the next 4,000 years, Kalimshan was dominated by nomadic tribes of humans, tribes from various places. Chult, the Shar, the Shining Plains, Shondath, even Am and Cormyr took turns dominating, only to be conquered by the next nearly identical tribe. Slowly, the nomadic nature of Kalimshan began to change, as explorers and traders from Am, Waterdeep, and Cormyr discovered the wonders of the new area. Some tribes began to settle down and develop new means of support like fishing, farming, or trading. These communities began to band together for mutual protection, and soon a civilization was born. It was only 1,300 years ago that the Shun Empire, now called Iltkazar, came into being. The Shuns were a grand and glorious empire, and their excesses were the foundation of Kalashite snobbery today. They grew wise and powerful in the ways of magic, and ships and caravans bearing the Shun flag travelled across the realms. Shun himself, a particularly powerful mage, created a book of great power during this time called the Tome of the Unicorn. The exact location of the tome has been lost in time, but since the book is 2x3 and made of pure metal, it is likely to still be around. Somewhere. 900 years ago, the Shun Empire abruptly vanished. A great magical upheaval was suspected at first, but learned mages of other lands disputed the claim. A force that great, they say, would have to have disturbed magical powers and beings throughout the realms, and that didn't happen. Sages who have studied the Shun at great length have reached no definitive conclusions, but the most popular theories today center around a plague or disease that decimated the population. Today, the Shun impact on Kalimshan is still great. The grandeur of that empire is responsible, more than anything else, for the strong national character of Kalimshan today. The ruins of the Shun's greatest city, Monrattivi Teshi Mir, can still be found in the wilderness to the west of the edge of the forest of Mir. See below for more on the Monrattivi Teshi Mir. Since the fall of Shun, no force or people has risen to solely dominate the land. There are a half dozen or so major cities, each of which exerts its power over its own area. About 170 years ago, a man in Kalimport amassed a large army and declared himself Pasha over the land. Before that army could march, however, the representatives of each major city met and agreed to recognize the Pasha's authority in limited areas, and to pay a small tribute to him, enough to pay for the works the Pasha was expected to do. The oldest son of each Pasha inherits the title. If there is no son, the mayors of each large city select a new one. The current Pasha, Rashid Dejenispul, has ruled for over 18 years and is the grandson of a Pasha elected by the mayors of Kalimshan 44 years ago. Okay, cool. Another nation that we didn't know a lot about, which now we do. History of the Dragon Coast. The history of the Dragon Coast is the history of money, particularly the darker side of the coin. Situated on the main trade routes between the Inner Sea and the Sword Coast, these lands never coalesced into a solid, coherent nation, like Cormyr or Sembia. Instead, small petty city-states have risen and fallen, powered by greed in the most powerful merchant or pirate faction of the day. As a result, the Dragon Coast has always been the home of the smuggler, the pirate, the rogue, and the hired killer. It has been the place where those seeking to skirt the laws of more civilized nations to the north make landfall. It is here that the Red Wizards gain their access to the western heartlands and where the cult of the dragon launches its plots to the south. And it is here that the independent secret societies and assassin guilds have their greatest power. The last semblance of organized resistance to this trend was the reign of Verovan, the last of the kings of Westgate. The monarchy of Westgate had long worked closely with the various mercantile and pirate factions, but the Verovan attempted to stem the growing power of the merchant houses and petty lords. His sudden and mysterious death without an acceptable heir in 1248 DR opened the door for much of what is now commonplace in the Dragon Coast: corruption and treachery. While it should be noted that Verovan's last name is still venerated in these lands, better known is Imerk, the greatest of the Inner Sea pirates, a brash and flamboyant rogue who united a pirate fleet beneath him and ruled from 1164 DR to his death in 1201 DR. Such it is in the Dragon Coast that good people are venerated, but the power of darker rogues is imitated. Okay, so another coastline that we've learned about here. The history of the Valley of the Gods. Oh, short. It said that even the powers must cavort and amuse themselves once in a great while. Far to the north of the spine of the world, frog in my throat, is the Valley of the Gods, a paradise unequaled on this world or in the plains. This playground of the gods is not meant for mortals. Any mortal who reaches the valley becomes a deity, for only deities may exist within the valley. Far too many mortals with delusions of grandeur have thrown away the pleasures of this side of the spine and their kingdoms in this world, only to break their backs searching for the legendary Valley of the Gods. Okay, cool. So just a little myth there. Although, religion is a little bit more real in this world, so, is it a myth or is it just, a fact that everybody knows? Anyway, it doesn't matter. History of the Western Heartland. The history of the Western Heartlands is a history of endless battles and destroyed empires. In ancient times, these were the lands of the fallen kingdom of Ilfarn, the lost kingdom of Man, and the rumoured Netheril. In more recent history, the land has been fertilized with blood and bone as forces from the empires of the sands surged northward, the evil peoples within Dragonspear and the Goblin Marches spilled forth, and mercenary companies moved to and fro in the service of one petty warlord after another. Recent battles levelled the way in and threatened Daggerford. Even the time of troubles did not leave this desolate land unmarked. Baal himself perished at Borskare Bridge, and the waters it passes over have remained poisoned to this day. Okay, a connection to Baal here. Okay, interesting. The cities of the Western Heartlands are strong, independent, and varied. They are also strongly motivated by trade and listen harder to the ringing of gold than the call of battle. But something else prospers in the open land: freedom and opportunity. No nation lays claim on the Western Heartlands to land beyond that which their armies can control, and no warlord can make demands beyond the swing of his axe. Small holds and castles regularly spring up only to be knocked down by invading forces or abandoned after a generation or two. Lost dungeons and secret citadels lie scattered throughout the land, and this rugged frontier presents more than enough opportunities for adventurers. Okay, cool. History of the Vast. 2 millennia ago, the Vast was Vastar, the Orcish lands. These were the breeding grounds of the goblin hordes that would spill eastward and cross the Dragon Reach in ramshackle boats to raid the elves. The orcs were overthrown by invading dwarves, who established the realm of the glimmering swords. It was during this time that the first humans came to the Vast, including the mage Maskir. The rule of the dwarves occurred against this backdrop of constant war with the orcs, such that there were only 40 years of true peace for the realm of glimmering swords. The dwarves were overrun by the orcs, and they escaped extinction only through the aid of humans and elven allies. The remaining dwarfs left the region to the newly arriving humans, and retreated to the east, to the south, and to isolated and hidden communities within the Vast. The most successful of the humans were the adventurers, whose hunger was sated by gold, and whose thirst was slaked by great deeds. This was the time of the glorious fools, and there were those who will argue that it still is that age, and as adventurers still rule the cities of Kalunt and Raven's Bluff, the orcs today are contained, if not conquered, and trade has grown up in the lands of the Vast. However, for many individuals with adventuring blood, it is still a wilderness in which one may prove one's worth. Okay. Next, history of the last march of the giants. East of the Great Rift in the Eastern Shar once stood a land of the Titans. This empire rose at the dawn of time in Faerun, and its lords thought to challenge the gods in their arrogance. In punishment, the powers cursed the reigning monarch of the land with fascination, and his brethren with devotion. The powers then dropped a star onto the land. The impact of the fallen star created a huge valley later known as the Sea of Fallen Stars. Slowly picking up speed, the ball rolled through the Titan nation and onward to the south. Unable to contain his curiosity, the Titan King ran off after the bouncing sphere, and his devoted followers dutifully followed in his tracks. The meteorite rolled on until it reached the Great Sea and vanished into the depths. The monarch dove into the sea, and lemming-like, the entire Titan race dove in after him, never to be seen again. Ashamed at the destruction they had wrought, the powers vowed to keep both curiosity and loyalty firmly in check to avoid such disasters in the future. They have done so to this day, preventing both new ideas from being pursued with any speed, and the intelligent races of Toril from ever fully cooperating. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? The powers that be have decided that there's going to be less new ideas, and the intelligent races aren't going to cooperate. Which explains why there's constant conflict and why civilization has stayed kind of similar in terms of its technological advancements throughout the ages. That's interesting. Yeah, it's a good way to describe something that needed to exist for like this world to make sense, right? Because obviously, like, there's been like 7,000 years in the world with magic. Like, why are there not all these new ideas? Well, if the gods are in the background stopping them being pursued with any speed, then that kind of explains it. If no one's cooperating, that kind of explains it. Interesting. And then we have the history of the Chosen of Mystra. The reason why Mystra, the goddess of magic, invested a portion of her divine might in mortals is not known. One of the more popular theories, and one that is gaining more support in the light of the goddess's other actions during that period, is that Mystra foresaw the time of troubles, and her own passing at the hands of Helm, and chose to give some of her power to mortals in order to ensure that her successor, the female mage Midnight as it turned out, would have a number of nearly immortal allies in the struggle against the schemes of the gods, the now dead Bane, Merkel, and Baal, who precipitated the time of troubles by stealing the Tablets of Fate. The theory goes on to suggest that Mystra informed Azuth at approximately the year of the Rising Flame, 0 DR, more than 1,300 years before the time of troubles, that some of her power must be put into the hands of mortals, who would then be known as Mystra's Chosen. This power would sleep within the bodies of those mortals, allowing Mystra to call on it only with their permission. It would give the Chosen the innate ability to heal quickly, and would give them lifespans far greater than those of ordinary mortals. Mystra speculated that these mortals might be able to call upon her power and thereby gain some special abilities, but these powers would not rival those of a deity. See powers below. The goddess of all magic then began to select mortals she thought to be suitable. One of the first was a young mage Ilminster, and she also singled out a promising wizard named Kelbin Arunson. Both have proved to be worthy and capable receptacles of her power, but Mystra's other early attempts to invest her power in living humans were unsuccessful, and she came to realize that only very few mortals were of stern enough substance to contain such power within themselves without being destroyed or corrupted. Even though some people aside from Elminster and Kelvin have possessed the requisite strength, it's possible that having lived for years prior to being visited by Mystra had set them on a path from which they were not able to deviate. Whatever the reason, the problem needed to be solved. To get around the difficulty, Mystra devised a plan to use herself as a vessel to breed individuals who could be nurtured and acclimated to her power from the very beginning of their lives. For the father of these individuals, she picked the best examples of human stock she could find. Dornal Silverhand, a nobleman and former harper who lived near Neverwinter. Mystra then possessed the body of Lu Shundar, a half-elven sorceress who Dornell was already attracted to. Mystra revealed her presence and her plan to Elu, who happily and eagerly agreed to have the goddess share her body. Elu had been reluctant, but under the influence of Mystra the woman became a seductress, and Dornal found his advances being suddenly returned with great fervour. Dornal and the Mystra Elu were wed in the year of the drifting stars, 760 DR. The first of 7 daughters, Anastra Sailun, was born in the following winter. Sailun's 6 sisters emerged at 1-year intervals thereafter, Inju, Alustril, Ambara Dove, Athena Astorma, or she prefers the shortened Storm these days, Anamunu Lariel, Alastra Shintrantra, known today as the Symbol, and Essequeli. These siblings have been known in the Realmsian lore as the 7 Sisters. Dornal, who had been kept in the dark about his wife's true nature through the years, presumably because Mystra didn't want to risk losing his services, was disappointed and nearly distraught by the time his 6th child was born. He had always wanted sons as well as daughters. More importantly, he was seeing his wife deteriorate right before his eyes. The strain of coexisting with the goddess all these years had turned Elu into a withered shell, in essence a lich clinging to life only because Mystra's power was within her. When Alu was carrying the seventh child, Dornall consulted a priest who told him his wife had been possessed by an entity of great magical power. To spare both of them any further agony, he attempted to slay his wife's physical body by severing her head from her body. As soon as he had done this, Mistra was forced to reveal herself to him, and she went on to explain her scheme. Just as she had worried would happen, Dornall was aghast at how he and his wife had been used by the goddess. He turned his back on the corpse of his wife, abandoned his lands and his children, and vanished into the north. Mistra bore him no ill will, and in fact protected him for the final 30 years of his life. When Dornall finally did meet his end, he called out to Mistra, and the goddess granted him continued existence as her servant. Now known as the Watcher, Dornall Silverhand travels the world unseen by mortals on a continuing mission to locate candidates to swell the ranks of the Chosen, and to identify possible threats to Mistra and her minions. Interesting. That is a messed up plan that Mistra had. An absolutely messed up plan. Cool, but extremely messed up. Okay, now we've read that batch of books, I'm going to do the same thing that I've done previously. I'm going to go and put all the books we've now read from all the different bags into this one, and then we'll see how many we have left, or all back into the table. So, I'll be back with you after this cut. We interrupt this cut in the video for a conversation that Mazzy randomly decided to have. Mazzy, I was never one to enjoy sitting still for too long. I hope you shall have something for me to do soon. Jaheira, O omnipresent authority figure, what are your commands now? Jaheira, there is a level of sarcasm in your tone that is perhaps unnecessary. We have a leader who honestly tries to anticipate our needs. Yoshimo? Tries, Mazzy? Excuse me, Felix is a good leader, but it is difficult enough to keep the group together. Perhaps you could be more constructive and less bitchy? Well, if that's how you wish to put it, yes. Worry not for the feelings of Felix, small one, for as he and I go far back and have an understanding of sorts. As you will, it was only a humble suggestion. I have no wish to intrude upon your relationship with Felix. And with that, we return to the cut in the video. Right, so I have sorted out all the books, and we have our last couple of collection of books. So, let's have a quick look and see what we got. So, all the books we have here are History of Shadowdale 1 to 13, and then, if I go into this scroll case, I have the remaining books that we need to read. Now, there is a little bit of an odd thing here in that we've got History of the Drow 1 and 2. It would seem odd to split them into 1 and 2 if there's not like a 3 somewhere, but we didn't seem to have it, so I don't know. I guess we might find that one in the future. But we do have the History of Shadowdale 1 to 13, so we might as well get started. Right. History of Shadowdale, the fall of Asmaer, last Drow Marshal of the Twisted Tower. I also don't think we've heard anything about Shadowdale in the previous books, so this will be interesting. The Drow rule of Shadowdale lasted until the early 900s Dale Reckoning, when the increased human population in the area brought the Dark Elves into conflict with their now more numerous neighbours. The humans were the Dalesmen, who a millennia earlier had crossed the Dragon Reach and made peace with the elves of Myth Dranor, settling at the borders of the great woods that was the Elven home. The Drow soon found themselves under continual attack, and most of those who held overground settlements retreated back below. The last powerful Drow leader was Asmaer, the Marshal of the Twisted Towers, in its last Drow-held days. Asmaer oversaw the last retreat of the Drow holdings in the face of a human uprising, and held the citadel against a year-long siege. With supplies and slaves brought up from the Underdark directly into the tower, the Drow could have conceivably held out forever. However, a human slave, family histories in the Dales indicate a number of possible individuals, poisoned the well in the tower and the citadel was easily overrun. Asmaer's body was not found among the dead, leading some to believe that he escaped back into the depths to rejoin his people. Noting the fact that he would have had to have explained to his matriarch how he lost Shadowdale, it is much more likely that, should Asmaer have survived, he went into voluntary exile, hiding from both human and Drow. Given that this occurred only 400 years ago, it is certainly possible that Asmir still lives. Okay, interesting. Well, on to part 2. Ashaba becomes First Lord of Shadowdale. Upon taking the Twisted Tower and removing the Drow yoke from the people, the Dalesmen had fully established the Dale of Shadowdale with its seat of power in the tower itself. Its first lord was a water wizard who had aided in the final attack, Ashaba, who was great in age when he ascended and ruled peacefully for 40 years thereafter. It is said that Ashaba realized he was dying and turned himself to water merging with the river. Since that time, the river, the ford, and the Twisted Tower all bear his name. Before passing on, Ashaba chose one of his trusted lieutenants as the new Lord of Shadowdale. Presented to the people of the Dale, he was made the new Lord by acclamation. In an additional honour, the pendant worn by Ashaba was thereafter recognised as a symbol of the lordship in the Dalelands and was possessed by each of the successive lords following. Okay, fairly straightforward so far. Part 3. So I'm just going through the timelines. This was like 400 years ago. Then we jump 40 years into the future. So we're like, 350 years ago at this point. Jodath and the Tyrist Massacre. The past 300 years have been an example of the best and worst of the Lords of Shadowdale. All have been non-native to the Dalelands, though all made their land their home. A century ago, the Lords of the Dale was one Jodath, a stiff-necked agnostic who denied the power of any god, good or evil, and used force to back up his beliefs. During this time, there was a great deal of religious persecution, including a massacre of Tyrists on the Watcher's Knoll. Jodath was eventually killed by a beast of the Netherplanes summoned by parties unknown, which then proceeded to rampage through the Dale. The beast was killed, and the Shadowdale rescued by the spellcasters Omre and Silun. Omre was proclaimed Lord by acclamation. Okay, it's a little bit odd to be agnostic, denying the power of any god when the gods are real and you can see them. It's an odd position to have. I think it was Pathfinder had an explanation for this because they had a character who they'd listed as atheist, but basically what they were meaning was they don't follow any god because essentially they did not believe that any were worthy of being followed, I think was the way that they described it, which I'm assuming is a similar thing here. He's denying that the gods have power over them, and he's using his force to back up his beliefs in this. So, okay, interesting. Part 4. Omre rules in peace. The longest period of peaceful rule was by Lord Omre and his wife Silun, better known, or is it Silun? Anyway, that sounds very close to Silune, which is what I'm trying to avoid. Anyway, better known as the Witch of Shadowdale. They ruled over the community for 40 years, a period of extended peace with their neighbouring Dales, nations, and the Elven people. It was this very peace and power which made the Dale the target for attacks and sabotage by the Black Network, Zhentarim. They sought, and still seek, to control the trade from the Moonsea to the Sword Coast, and desired to make Shadowdale a vassal state of Zhentail Keep. Lord Omre's rule ended tragically when he was assassinated by Zhentish agents. Okay, so now we've got a new player in here. Let's see what's happening with this one. Jordan the False Lord. Lord Omre was assassinated by Zhentarim agents, who in turn were captured and killed by the warrior Jordhan. Jordhan was the with the pendant of Ashaba in hand, the symbol of the lordship in the Dales, proceeded to present himself as the new lord, and was so acclaimed by the people. It was unknown to the people that Jordhan was also an agent of the Zhentarim, and that the entire proceeding had actually been a ruse. Jordhan abandoned the Twisted Tower, instead establishing himself in Castle Crag, east of Shadowdale. His court was soon overrun with agents of the Black Network. When the people eventually revolted, Zhentail Keep sent keeping forces to maintain Yordhan's rule. Silun, Lord Omre's widow, now aware of the deception, but a firm pacifist, did her best to keep the Dale healthy and intact during Yordhan's evil rule. Okay, so what happened to him? I'm assuming we're going to find that out in 6. This one's very much a straightforward, this happened, this happened, this happened kind of story, which is much easier to follow, I would say, than the jumping ones. Kelben kills Yordhan. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Now, Kelben was one of the 2 original Chosen of Mistra, because we had Elminster and then Kelben, I think. So I think that lines up. Anyway, Lord Yordhan's rule of Shadowdale ended when he encountered Kelben Arunson, also called Blackstaff. The story at the time was that Yordhan accepted an invitation from Kelben to visit Waterdeep, and there he took ill and died. In reality, Yordhan ambushed Kelben as the mage was leaving Shadowdale, and the Blackstaff killed him. In either case, Kelben took hold of the pendant of Ashaba, the symbol of the Lordship of the Dales, and returned to Waterdeep with it, promising to send a suitable candidate for lordship to the Dales. Yordhan had ruled for 5 years, and without his advocacy, Castle Crag was abandoned and the Zential Keep troops routed. Yordhan's previously chosen successor was a Milt Vontan named Lyron, but without the pendant, this individual was considered a pretender to the throne. Okay, I do love the idea that Kelben was basically just like wandering around, just tried to leave, randomly got attacked, killed someone, and was like, right, I'll solve this problem about who's running the Shadowdale later, I gotta go back to Waterdeep. But anyway, he's just a level of power above where everybody else is in the area. He's just like, my problems are different than yours. Alright. Part 7. Lords accepted by acclamation. This acclamation of the people has formed the basis for choosing the Lord of Shadowdale since the routing of the evil Lord Yordhan by Kelben Blackstaff. Usually a predecessor will step down as opposed to dying in office, and his chosen successor will be approved by the populace at large. This system has had its drawbacks, as will be shown below, but in general it has served the independent, self-willed people of the Dale very well. They've avoided the genetic lottery of which good bureaucracies and bad kingships are made, a quote from the Venerable Elminster. The symbol of the lordship is the pendant of Ashaba, a device owned by the original wizard and used to determine the rightful lord of the Dale. Okay, so that's just letting us know what this acclamation thing is. Cool. Part 8. The Time of No Lords. During the period when Kelben Blackstaff held the pendant of Ashaba, the symbol of the lordship in the Dales, Silun, widow of the murdered Lord Omre, was the de facto ruler of Shadowdale. Though these years were known as the Time of No Lords, Silun and an adventuring company known as Main's Band were responsible for driving out the Zential Keep forces and keeping at bay the monsters in the area. The Twisted Tower, the traditional seat of leadership, remained uninhabited following its abandonment by the evil Lord Yordhan, and neither Silun nor the companions of Main's Band wished to assume the mantle of leader. With time, Main's Band passed on to other lands and adventures. Okay, Part 9. Doused Sulwood becomes Lord of Shadowdale. 3 winters following his defeat of the evil Lord Yordhan, Kelben Blackstaff found a suitable candidate to assume leadership of the Dales, or rather a group of candidates. They were the Knights of Mithranor, so named to show their interest in the Elven territories and their connection with the Elven peoples, and Kelben gave them the pendant of Ashaba, the symbol of the lordship, in return for services rendered to himself and to Shadowdale. Their leader, the ranger Florin Falconhand, refused the honour of the lordship. It was therefore passed to Doused Sulwood, who was made the new lord with the support of Florin and Silun, wife of the murdered Lord Ombre, and apparently also the secret support of Kelben as well. Okay, we have a new lord. Part 10. Elminster moves to Shadowdale. It is of note that during the time that Doust Sulwood of the Knights of Mithranor assumed the role of Lord of Shadowdale, Elminster took up residence in the area. A semi-regular visitor up until that time, he took possession of a low, abandoned tower at the foot of the Old Skull and declared himself to be officially in retirement. Yes, we'll see how long that lasts for. The nature of that retirement varies from active involvement in local affairs to long-term vacations on other planes. The natives of the Dale have come to an understanding that they cannot always count on the powerful mage being in residence in times of need or danger, but when he is present in these circumstances, his aid is usually given. Okay, Part 11. Doust chooses Morngrim Amcathra to succeed him. Doust Sulwood, recommended to the position by Kelvin Blackstaff, ruled Shadowdale as Lord for 5 years. Seems like a millennium. He was oft known to have reported, and the tedium of court life and the lure of adventure eventually caused him to retire his position and join the Knights of Mithranor in regular adventuring. He handed the pendant of Ashaba, the symbol of the lordship, onto one of the younger knights, a Waterhavian noble named Morngrim Amcathra. Morngrim had been dispatched by Kelvin from Waterdeep for other purposes, but Doust liked both the young man's straightforward honesty and his willingness to shoulder the burden of protecting the small community from myriad dangers. Time has chosen this choice a wise one, or has proven this choice a wise one. Part 12. Charles and Morngrim meet and marry. The implications of Kelvin Blackstaff Runeson choosing the last two lords of Shadowdale, Doust Sulwood and Morngrim Amcathra, were not lost on the Dale's powerful neighbour to the south, Cormyr. An agent was sent northward to divine Morngrim's true intentions and to guarantee the Dale's continued good relationship with the throne of the Purple Dragon. The agent was a rogue named Cheryl Rowan Mantle, sent by Vanger da Hast, though all paperwork on this matter has been curiously incinerated in Suzail, so all is hearsay and tale. Cheryl discovered more than she intended and fell in love with young Morngrim. The two married and became the Lord and Lady of Shadowdale. Cheryl's loyalty is now to her husband and to the land they co-rule. This was probably not the intention of the Cormyrians. Okay, and now we're getting the last one, which must be present day. Morngrim's rule. Since being recommended to the position by outgoing Lord Doust Sulwood, Lord Morngrim Amcathra's rule of Shadowdale has been less peaceful than he had hoped. The first Battle of Shadowdale occurred in the Year of the Prince, 1357 DR, and involved Dale land forces routing those of Liran the Pretender. Liran has made repeated attempts to gain the lordship, as was intended by the former Zentish puppet, Lord Jord Han. While significant, this battle pales when compared to the larger battle fought on the same site between the Bane-led Zential Keep forces and the Dales during the Time of Troubles, 1358 DR/0 PR. When the Battle of Shadowdale is referred to without a number, it usually means the second battle. In addition, Morngrim has had to deal with a large number of skirmishes, incursions, a possible invasion from below, explosions, and other sundry disasters. Morngrim and Cheryl have one child, Scotty, who is now 9 winters old. By the customs of the area, he is not considered to the heir apparent, and another suitable warrior or mage may take the reins of power of the small community. Most feel that Morngrim will hold the pendant until his son has reached his maturity, then abdicate in favour of Scotty's favour once he takes his grown name. If this happens, it will be the first occasion of the lordship of Shadowdale passing down through a family. Interesting. So we got a lot of history of Shadowdale there, and basically a history of Elminster's home. Interesting. The other thing that was quite intriguing, actually, was this bit right here. Where are we? The Bane-led Zential Keep forces. So that's a connection to Bane, and I think we've got a book on him, Baal and Merkel later. But That's interesting that we've got a little Bane reference in there with the Zentarim.
I am willing.
Okay. Well, let's put all these books away. Get rid of these and those. Cool. Right. Now we are on to our last set of books, which should be all of these. So it's the History of the Dead 3, I think, is the one that we're going to want to read. There we go. Why don't we just start with that? Let's mix things up. So these are History of the Drow, Cormyr, History of the Dead 3. I'll just move this one out. History of the Dead 3, Knucklebones, Skull Bowling, and the Empty Throne. In ages past, there was but one god of strife, death, and the dead, and he was known as Yurgle, Lord of the End of Everything. Yurgle fomented and fed on the discord between mortals and powers alike. When beings slew each other in their quest for power or in their hatred, he welcomed them into his shadowy kingdom of eternal gloom. As all things died, everything came to him eventually, and over time he built his power into a kingdom unchallenged by any other god. Eventually, however, he grew tired of his duties, for he knew them too well. Without challenge there is nothing, and in nothingness there is only gloom. In such a state, the differences between absolute power and absolute powerlessness is undetectable. During this dark era, there arose three powerful mortals, Bane, Baal, and Merkel, who lusted after the power Yurgle wielded. The trio forged an unholy pact, agreeing that they would dare to seek such ultimate power or die in the attempt. Over the length and breadth of the realms they strode, seeking powerful magic and spells and defying death at every turn. No matter what monster they confronted or what spells they braved, the three mortals emerged unscathed at every turn. Eventually the trio destroyed one of the 7 lost gods, and they each seized a portion of his divine essence for themselves. The trio then journeyed into the Grey Waste and sought out the Castle of Bone. Through armies of skeletons, legions of zombies, hordes of non-corporeal undead, and a gauntlet of liches they battled. Eventually, they reached the object of their lifelong quest, the Bone Throne. "I claim this throne of evil," shouted Bane the tyrant. "I'll destroy you before you can raise a finger," threatened Baal the assassin. "And I shall imprison your essence for eternity," promised Merkel the necromancer. Yurgle arose from his throne with a weary expression and said, "The throne is yours. I have grown weary of this empty power. Take it if you wish. I promise to serve and guide you as your seneschal until you grow comfortable with the position." Before the stunned trio could react, the Lord of Dead continued, "Who among you shall rule?" The trio immediately fell to fighting amongst themselves while Yurgle looked on with indifference. When eventually it appeared that either they would all die of exhaustion or battle on for an eternity, the Lord of the End of Everything intervened. "After all you have sacrificed, you would come away with nothing. Why don't you divide the portfolios of the office and engage in a game of skill for them?" asked Yurgle. Bane, Baal, and Merkel considered the god's offer and agreed. Yurgle took the heads of his 3 most powerful liches and gave them to the trio that they would compete by bowling the skulls. Each mortal rolled a skull across the Grey Waste, and we agreed that the winner would be he who bowled the farthest. Malar the Beast Lord arrived to visit Yurgle at this moment. After quickly ascertaining that the winner of the contest would get all of Yurgle's power, he chased off after the 3 skulls to make sure that the contest would be halted until he had a chance to participate for part of the prize. Bane, Baal, and Merkel again fell to fighting, as it was obvious their sport was ruined. Again Yurgle intervened. "Why don't you allow Lady Luck to decide so you don't have to share with the beast?" The trio agreed, and Yurgle broke off his skeletal finger bones and gave them to the players. When Malar returned from chasing the skulls, he found that the trio had finished a game of knucklebones. Bane cried out triumphantly, "As winner, I choose to rule for all eternity as the ultimate tyrant. I can induce hatred and strife at my whim, and all will bow down before me and my kingdom." Merkel, who had won second place, declared, "But I choose the dead, and by doing so I truly win, because all you are lord over, Bane, will eventually be mine. All things must die, even gods." Baal, who finished third, demurred, I choose death. It is by my hand that all that you rule, Lord Bane, will eventually pass to Lord Merkel. Both of you must pay honor to me and obey my wishes, since I can destroy your kingdom, Bane by murdering your subjects, and I can starve your kingdom, Merkel, by staying my hand. Malar growled in frustration but could do nothing, and yet again only the beasts were left for him. And Yurgo merely smiled, for he had been delivered. Okay, so that's the history of the Dead 3. Let's move on to the history of the Drow, parts 1 and 2. So, the Descent. We know very little of the Illithiri, or Elves of the South, before this crucial event. Even then, they were known as Dark Elves for the hue of their skins. They dwelt in the jungles and hot forests of the south, a proud, warlike, culturally advanced, some sages of other elven people say decadent, folk. The Illithiri attacked all neighbours, including other elven tribes. Their cruel raids and depredations, ordered by warlike nobility and the clergy of their two cruel deities, Gondaur and Lulth, forced elves, humans, dwarves, and others to ally against them. Defeated in a series of titanic magical battles, the Dark Elves fled into underground warrens that they had earlier discovered. This event, known as the Descent, marked the end of the Drow as a surface-dwelling race. Okay, Part 2. The Dark Wars. The warlike Drow nature did not change when they escaped their surface foes during the Descent. In fact, they immediately launched a series of wars to establish territories in the Underdark. They began by stealing and seizing dwarven magical items and using them against the dwarves, establishing an enmity which is still strong today. The Drow then fought among themselves, noble against noble, priest against priestess, for rule over their new realm. This all-out war ended amid great magical explosions that brought down the roof of the largest dwarven cavern they had seized, the Great Berrinden. The ceiling collapsed entirely, burying many Drow and the shattered dwarven cities. The cavern, now open to the sky, became known as the Great Rift. The surviving Drow nobles gathered what people, slaves, and equipment they could seize and fled into the Underdark in search of places to dwell. This scattering brought about the many rival, self-interested cities where most Drow live today. Okay, so just a very, very quick history on the Drow there. Not a lot to say about it, it's just very quick history on the Drow. History of Cormyr. Cormyr dates its years from the founding of House Obarskaya the First, 342 years ago, the first of the noble houses and the line of its kings. For the bulk of this time, Cormyr was little more than a single city, Sozale, and a few fortified outposts. At times the monarch was forced by rebellion and intrigue to rule from these outposts instead of from the throne. King Azuin is the fourth of his name and the 71st of his line. The land has been officially at peace for many years, since Rearguard overthrew the last border raiders. However, Cormyrian armies have taken part in many actions in nearby regions, recently mustering its forces to face Gondegal, the rebel of Arabel, to occupy Tilverton on the marches of the Dalelands, and to lead a crusade against the great Tugan horde invading from the east. One wit has noted that, yes, the land is at peace, but the army has to keep busy. In addition to pursuing major actions, Cormyrian patrols often skirmish with bandits on the road in the north and west, and are at present battling orcs and other creatures north and east of Cormyr in Tilver's Gap and the Shadow Gap. Both of these areas are threatened by raiders who will menace Cormyr itself if they ever overrun Tilverton. Cormyr has built a fortress, Castle Crag, to defend the kingdom from attacks from that quarter, and maintains the High Horn to protect against attacks from the west. Okay, cool. We've heard a lot about Cormyr from other things, but this is just kind of a little bit about them themselves. But they've been kind of involved with a lot of other things, but not heavily involved, if that makes sense, at least from what we've read. Right. The history of Halrua. Halrua was settled centuries ago by wizards fleeing the Faerim in what was to become the Anorok Desert. The first wizards came in unique flying ships invented by the Nezarese and found a beautiful and rich country settled by only shepherds and large herds of aurochs and wild wrath. It was here that the wizards decided to make a stand, should the Faerim follow. The Faerim never did, but Halrua has had to defend itself from attacks from all its neighbours since then. Over the centuries, Dambrath has attacked and raided Halrua's ports and borders multiple times. Once led by a magic-resistant barbarian, the Dambray occupied all of the country south of Lake Halrua. They were defeated in battle by the great archmage Mycontil, who slew their barbarian leader. 40,000 Dambray attacked and were stopped by 500 Halruans. More than 200 Halruan wizards, including Mycontil, died in the battle. The last attack upon Halrua was less than 100 years ago, through the Telath Path by the power-hungry king of Lapalia. He had allied with bandits from the wastes, and though this time the Halruans were able to field a larger force, including fighting men as well as wizards in their skyships, the attackers were easily routed. Halrua also suffered through a civil war about 5 centuries ago, when a number of mages advocated beginning new experiments in magic, ones which even the Netherese didn't approve of. The renegades were driven from the region, but went on to found the land of Thay, or so it is said in Halrua. Since then, Halrua has been at peace. It has had no declared wars, though it still suffers raids from Dambray pirates, bandits of the wastes, savages from the Mehar jungles, and other pirate, raider, or hungry wizard who thinks that magic and wealth grow on trees in Halrua. This constant raiding has made the Halruans very defensive, warlike, and traditional. The people say that since wizards have always led them, wizards always will. Okay, again, we'd heard a lot about Halrua from other histories, so it's just a nice view into them there. Okay, so that was Halrua. We're now on to the Book of King Strom III. I don't know what this is, but okay. The ancient text is yellowed and crumbling and written in a language that is far removed from modern-day common. Still, portions of it are translatable with effort. Overall, the book describes the burial of King Strom III and how great efforts were made to keep his tomb safe from the grave robbers. Oh, never mind. This one's a quest book. Yeah, that's one that we used for a quest. Okay. The history of Lurien. Lurien, land of the halflings. The halflings of Lurien claim that it is the original homeland of halflings in the realms. Although other halflings may disagree with this, it is true that Lurien was settled hundreds, perhaps thousands of years ago. Lurien's history is one of conquerors and subjugation. Throughout the centuries, the halflings have been conquered by the barbarians who used to inhabit Dambrath, by the kingdom of Estegund, and even once by the monsters of Baldur. In every case, the invaders were eventually defeated because they made the mistake of underestimating the halflings due to their small stature. A good bit of mischief, mayhem, and general troublemaking by the halflings also helped end the occupations. Currently, Lurien is enjoying unprecedented prosperity. The halflings are currently taking advantage of their relationship with the nation of Durpar, their biggest customer and greatest competitor. Also, through these close ties with Durpar, Lurien has protected itself against another Dambray invasion. The rulers of Dambrath must know that if they begin to expand to the east, they will arouse the ire of Durpar, as well as the Var and Estegund. The threat of a trade embargo and or military consequences have kept this aggressive nation away from the Lurieners. Okay, we haven't heard very much about them, but we did hear an awful lot about halflings constantly being conquered, so I assume that was them. Sembia. History of Sembia. The land of Sembia was settled by humans coming to the Sea of Fallen Stars from the south, and was originally chosen for its stands of huge, high-quality Ilir wood timber, so prized in shipbuilding. However, as the forests were cleared over the years, the tree cutters came into increasing conflict with elves that feared the loss of their entire wood. this would undoubtedly have occurred had not the hastily gathered mercenary troops of the fledgling land between it been defeated by the elves at Singing Arrows 884 DR. This battle convinced the distant Chondath to abandon its holdings in the region and allow the immigrant Sembians to establish their independence, though as little more than a collection of rival city-states, much like the Moonsea or Vast of today. It also set the stage for the appearance of the Raven. The young country grew strong as farms prospered in the newly cleared lands. Craftsmen arrived from the south to take advantage of this chance to acquire land and wealth, bringing their trades with them. Rauthauvr, the Raven, unified the city-states and towns in the face of the continuing elven menace, and insisted on maintaining a standing army which he kept in practice by policing Sembia's borders and improving its roads. At this time, 913 DR, Sembia became a true nation. The Moonsea's, Dragon Sea's, mineral wealth was discovered by humankind at about this time, and pressure began to grow for a trade road through the elven woods to make Sembia the world's gateway to all these riches. The Raven went alone as an envoy to the elven court. There he asked the elders of their council to approve a road open to humans linking Sembia to the shores of the Dragon Sea. An earlier road had been destroyed during the conflict and was now overgrown. Raven proposed that the elves choose the route and retain control of it and the woods around it so that no woodcutting or human settlement would occur. The elves had earlier made similar arrangements with the Dalesmen and had no difficulty with the concept of such an agreement. However, the inhabitants of Vaersdale, now Harrowdale, refused the proposal, not wanting or needing such a road at that time. Curious, since later a ruler of Harrowdale commissioned the disastrous Half-Axe Trail. The elves, not wishing to offend long-time allies, refused Raven's request. Rebuffed, the Raven then threatened to exterminate the isolated elves of Amothoi. What a negotiator. Do you want to do this? No. Alright, I'm going to exterminate all of you unless you do it. It's an interesting negotiating position. There's really nowhere to go from there. The last embattled remnant of the elves in Sembia if the elven court did not cooperate. If the road were built, however, they would be free to trade, or not trade, as they wished. The elves agreed under this pressure, and Sembia's financial future was secured. Hillsfar, on the shores of the Dragon Sea, became a commercial meeting ground between humankind and elves, as did Elventree. The route the elves chose ran past the base of the Standing Stone as a reminder of earlier, less hostile dealings between humans and elves. Over the years, the elves of Amothoi came north to join their brethren, or slipped away to seek Evermeet, leaving the wood to gradually disappear. Sembia grew rich under merchant leaders of increasing wisdom, such as Ser, for whom Serab was named, and Selgar, for whom Chansilgaunt was renamed as Silgaunt. Before his death, Rauthauvr, the Raven, saw these merchants had a strong standing council of merchant elders to advise them and to ensure that no ruler could hold onto power by force of arms. Then, this far-sighted man, creator of a nation now half-blind and infirm from old war wounds, rode north into the elven woods and disappeared. None know what happened to him or where his bones lie, save for perhaps a few elder elves. Okay. Interesting. A lot of the nations in Faerun appear to have ended up with like a council of rulers, if that makes sense. Like a strong council of elders to rule them, or, various lords in a council to rule them. Just interesting. There's a lot of them that seem to have ended up with a similar government structure. Anyway, history of the Dales and the Elven Court, which I think links quite nicely into the one we just read. The founding of the Dale lands long preceded the creation of any of the existing Dales by hundreds of years, and the year numbering system known as Dale Reckoning is actually a commemoration of humankind being given permission to settle in the lands north and west of the Inner Sea. Most of the current Dales are relative newcomers, the older having been abandoned, destroyed, or overrun long ago. In those ancient days when Suzail and Chondathan, now called Lune were mere coastal trading posts, the elves who ruled this forest entertained a request from settlers from the east, refugees and farmers from far-off Impiltor and Damara. This request was to farm and settle the borders of the great forest Cormanthor, in particular the rich dells and dales along the rivers Arken and Ashaba. These newcomers did not wish to lumber or clear the inhabited forest, but only to settle on the rich territories on its edges, and unlike some other settlers, early Sembia comes to mind, were willing to ask permission. The lords of the Elven court granted that request in return for aid from these new Dalelanders against outside aggression, both monstrous orcs and goblins from the lands of Thar, and human, the rising powers of Cormyr and Sembia. In commemoration of this pact, humans and elves raised the standing stone that is now seen where the Moonsea Ride reaches Rotharver's Road, the road from Esembra to Hillsfar. It is from the date of the raising of the stone that the Dale reckoning is counted. According to the pact made, the Dalesmen would only settle those regions that were unforested or unclaimed by the elves. As the elven woods receded under the axes of further invaders and settlers, old dales perished and new ones came into being along the borders of the woods. People, both good and bad, have raised petty nations in the Daleslands since, though any one dale that turned against the pact would have had to deal with the others. Each of the dales is a large swath of farms and fields, with a few scattered settlements and usually one central marketplace, capital, or dale centre. These centres are often, but not always, named after the dales they're in, adding to the confusion as to what is a daleland's territory. The dales are not city-states, for their largest groupings of population rate as towns at best, and they lack the defensive walls common throughout the heartlands. They are neither true nations in the fashion of Cormyr or Sembia, and occupy a grey middle ground wherein they are nothing more or less than dales. Each dale has slightly different laws, customs, and military organisations. Many rely on the work of charismatic heroes and adventuring companies for aid in times of trouble, and a large number of these individuals use the region as a base. This attraction for adventurers is further increased by the large number of elven and pre-elven ruins in the area, and the departure of the elven court for Evermeet, leaving the woods open for exploration and exploitation. The history of the Dales is filled with battles and attacks on its various members. In the Year of the Worm, 1356 DR, Scardale, under the command of Lashan Amercer, launched a number of swift attacks conquering a number of surrounding Dales. A coalition of forces from the others, as well as Sembia, Cormyr, and Zential Keep, crushed the invaders and occupied Scardale. During the time of troubles, 1358 DR/0 PR, Shadowdale was attacked by Zential Keep. More recently, the Dalelands have committed forces to a unified army under King Azuin IV of Cormyr to turn back the Tugian invasion, 1360 DR. Okay, so yeah, that did link in quite nicely with the Sembia stuff. And our last book is The History of Gondegel the Lost King. Arabel, long under the dominion of Cormyr, for a time became the centre of a swordsman's empire. This swordsman was Gondegel, the Lost King, who, in the Year of the Dragon, 1352 DR, so very close to present day, attempted to carve a kingdom for himself centred on Arabel. It was to extend north to the desert mountains, south and west of Wyvern Water, and the farms outlying from Evening Star and east to Tilvar's Gap and the mountain passes. In the years following, people would say that Gondegel's reach was no longer than his blade. He could not hold any of the territory against the might of Cormyr, Sembia, Daggerdale, Tilverton, and several of the other Dales, all of whom he drew the blood and ire of in the making of his throne. Gondegel ruled for less than a season, though he reigned officially for scarcely 8 days. The remainder of his rule was spent fighting here and there against one foe or another in the lands he claimed. His troops were largely mercenary, and his treasury of seized goods was small and soon gone. One night, Gondigal's forces simply melted away before the advancing troops of Cormyr, and was gone. King Azuin IV retook Arabel on that morn without wetting a blade. No one has ever found the body of Gondigal. He is known to have fled north and then east via Teshwave, but then his fate becomes a matter of conflicting rumours and legend. Some believe he still lives with a score or more of loyal followers keeping court in the wilds somewhere, a careful and ruthless bandit who takes care that none survive his attacks to carry tales anywhere. Where entire caravans vanish at times, anywhere between the High Dale and far-off Impiltur, he is blamed by talk in the taverns. Gondigal was said to have been a tall, grey-haired warrior of considerable personal skill and intelligence. His badge was a grey wolf's head, face on with red eyes. Caravan guards often warned merchants to beef up the escort on a particular caravan, else thy gold'll soon be gilding Gondigal's throne. Gondigal was an impeccable swordsman and somewhat chaotic in his self-professed neutral alignment. If he does indeed yet live, the magic or treasure he carries, and who his allies might be, are all unknown. Gondigal's reign has had a great influence on the King of Cormyr, at that time in his second decade of rule. Not only was Azuin forced to put down an effective rebellion in his own country, he was forced to pay more attention to matters outside Suzail, to become the ruler of a nation as opposed to a city-state. Further, the bloodless assault on Arabel was Azuin's first true experience at the head of his army, and the joy of freeing the people of Arabel is one that remains with him. Bit of an odd tale at the end for this one, but that is us having read every single book that we had up until this point. And if you made it to this point in the episode, oh, well done. That was quite a lot of reading and quite a lot of lore all at once. So we kind of have that seeping in here, and it'll be something that we can use when we see bits popping up in the future. Like if someone says they're from Cormyr, we have a rough idea of what's going on with them. If they say they're from Waterdeep, we have a rough idea of what's going on with them. So we now have some idea of the world in which we are inhabiting. But yes, that was a lot of books, a lot of reading, and I am going to end the episode there. Thank you very much for watching, and next time we're moving back on to, some actual questing, I think. So, thank you for watching, see you next time, goodbye.